No. Welcome everyone to Election Daily's coverage of the July 14th primaries and primary runoffs. Tonight we've got primaries in 3 states. We've got runoffs in Alabama, the prominent Senate runoff between Tommy Tuberville and Jeff Sessions, and 2 congressional runoffs in the 1st and 2nd districts. In Maine, we have a Democratic Senate primary where Sarah Gidgeon is the favorite, and in the 2nd district, we have a Republican congressional primary where Eric Brakey is the favorite. And in Texas, we have a Democratic Senate primary runoff between Royce West and MJ Hager, and countless competitive congressional runoffs for various House seats. So thank you for viewing with us, and I'm going to hand it off now to Eric Cunningham, the founder of Elections Daily.
Yep. Awesome. So yeah, we've got a really good show for you tonight. I think you're going to be really excited with some of the stuff we're able to do. But basically, those 3 are the most important. So I think I'll kind of start off on the Texas races. Me and Jared Stone recently, or we worked on an episode for the Map Room, which will be out soon, which is about Harris County in Texas. So we can kind of go over some of those important races in Texas. But before we get started, Harrison Lavelle put out a really good article this morning on Elections Daily that went over all of the big races, what we're looking for, what candidates are in the running. It's called Alabama, Texas, and More, a preview of the July 14th runoffs. Go to Elections Daily and read that if you're wanting to find out a little bit more about some of the candidates and what's going on. But so yeah, in Texas, the big one is of course the Senate primary. We have Royce West and MJ Hager. The 2 of them are competing for that bid, in which they'll be competing against John Cornyn, the longtime senator, for the Senate seat. Texas has been looking a little more competitive in the presidential column lately. We still have the Senate race as likely Republican, if I recall right, but it's definitely one that could be more competitive as it goes down the stretch. MJ Hager has proven to be a really strong fundraiser. She ran very close in a congressional race in 2018. And so she's kind of seen as a strong candidate, kind of in the vein of an Amy McGrath, except in a state that's kind of winnable. But Royce West has actually gotten a ton of endorsements from high-level Democrats, and he's kind of put on a little bit of a stronger showing the last few weeks. So that's kind of what we're looking at in that race. I'll go ahead and throw it to Jared Stone, who I think it kind of explains some of the, specifically the Harris County one. The big one is, I believe, the 10th congressional district runoff.
For the 10th congressional, are you referring to with Mike Siegel on the Democratic column?
Yeah, the Fort Bend base seat.
Oh, okay.
Oh, not the 10th. Yeah, not the 10th. That would be the 22nd. Sorry.
So the 22nd district is seeing a Republican primary runoff between 2 competitors who have both touted their credentials as a pretty pro-Trump candidate. You have Kathleen Wall, and then you have Troy Niels, who's actually the sheriff of Fort Bend County. And both of them are trying to outflank each other on the right, which is an interesting dynamic given the fact that the 22nd district, which is anchored in Fort Bend County but extends into Brazoria and Harris counties, is actually districts that is moving very much to the left and in Biden's favor. And it would not be surprising if Biden is actually able to secure the district in his presidential bid. And so considering the quality and the perspective of the Republican candidates in the Republican primary runoff, it'll be interesting to see who wins. And depending on that, it'll tell a story about how competitive the district will really be on the congressional level in the general election in November.
Yeah. That's probably, I think, the biggest one on the Republican side. There's several other Democratic primaries you can go read in the article. But you can definitely go read them. We'll explain them a little bit more in more detail later. But before the results start coming out, I think we should explain the Alabama Senate race, which is probably the marquee race on the Republican side. I can explain it if someone needs to, but if anyone else wants to go ahead and have a crack at that,
go ahead, Eric.
Go for it. Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting race, right? So you have Jeff Sessions, who is probably one of the proto-Trump senators, very much a populist, anti-immigration. Was one of his big focuses, specifically illegal immigration, but also in general. He's been endorsed by the populist wing of the party, are really anchoring to bring him back because he fits very well more in that agenda than a more typical Republican would. So you have like Ann Coulter, specifically gone off heavily endorsing him. He's gotten some really big hitters from the very Trumpy wing of the party who think that despite his Donald Trump's hatred of him as a person and as a candidate at this point, that he represents that wing of the party better than Tommy Tuberville. And of course, Tommy Tuberville is a fascinating candidate because he's kind of a first-time political guy. He moved to the state a couple of years ago. Obviously, he'd been living in another. He has connections there for a while from coaching at Auburn University. That's probably where he was one of the. He was a very well-known head coach, so he's well-known in the state. He's been more of a generic Republican, but still, very Trumpy. It's Alabama. So he's been endorsed by Trump. He's been endorsed by more people who are obviously wanting to respect his endorsement. Kind of what some people are looking at is that in recent weeks, the Trump endorsement has kind of taken a hit as a concept. You had North Carolina 11, where Madison Cawthorn beat a Trump-endorsed candidate. You've had some other congressional districts as well recently where he's kind of missed the ball. And so this might kind of be a bigger test of, is the Trump endorsement what it used to be at this point? Because Trump has very much he's not only endorsed Tommy Tuberville, he has aggressively gone as far from an endorsement as possible for Jeff Sessions. He vehemently despises him and has made so very clear. He would probably not be very happy if Jeff Sessions were to win the primary tonight. They were the top two in the primary. Tommy Tuberville finished ahead of Jeff Sessions, but it was very close. A third candidate, Bradley Byrne, was in the running as well from his Mobile-based district, which also has a House runoff itself to replace him. So that's the other big one we're looking at, and that's going to have kind of ramifications for the Senate race in November against Doug Jones, the incumbent Democrat, who is, depending on which election site you look at, he's somewhere between a very big underdog and a massive underdog. We have the race at likely Republican. Most others have it at lean Republican. Actually, I think we have it at safe Republican. Most have it at likely.
Yes, that's correct. Our Senate team has it at safe.
Yep. Most have it at likely or lean. Most are at likely at this point, although recent polling has been a little bit better for the Doug Jones camp, specifically with Tuberville in the race. There's been kind of if you look at some of these polls, there are some Jeff Sessions voters, according to the polls, who would write in a candidate rather than vote for Tommy Tuberville. That's probably a best-case scenario for Doug Jones, running in a state where Donald Trump won by over 25 percentage points. For perspective, the last time we had a senator running in such a prominent situation in a state of a similar lean was in 2012 in Massachusetts, where Scott Brown was literally the most popular politician in the state of Massachusetts and still lost to Elizabeth Warren by a fairly decisive margin. That kind of underscores the problem in Alabama, a much less elastic state, which is why we have the race as safe Republican at the moment. But obviously, Democrats are hoping to hold it. They're hoping to at least be competitive in Alabama. That's the other big race of the night. There's also the main Senate race, although that's not really expected to be as competitive. Sarah Gideon is expected to do fairly well there. The question is just how much she wins by. Is kind of the consensus in that race.
Yeah, and I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other Texas races tonight because there are quite a few competitive Texas races. Another big race on the GOP side in Texas tonight that's going to be a testament to whether or not Trump can continue, or I should say, can he save his endorsement record, is the race to replace Mac Thornberry. And in that seat, Texas 13, one of the reddest in the nation, the Republican primary is tantamount to victory. So it's going to be interesting to see. The two candidates in the runoff are Josh Weingarner and Ronnie Jackson, and Trump is polling for Ronnie Jackson because he was his White House physician. And he ended up having to bow out of the position after the Senate failed a cabinet nomination for him. John Tester led the fight for that, and that was part of the campaign feud there. And in addition to that, Ronnie Jackson is now running for Congress there, like we said. And if he wins the runoff, and there has been no polling to really show which way the runoff is leaning, so we don't really know. But if he does win, that will be a victory for Trump. The worst case scenario for the president tonight would be a Sessions loss and a Jackson loss, because those would be two key endorsements of people that lost. Also, in the 23rd, in Texas's 23rd district, Tony Gonzalez has the support of President Trump, as well as Will Hurd and prominent politicians in Washington as well. His opponent, Raul Reyes, another veteran, has the support of Ted Cruz. So that's another primary where we haven't had a lot of polling to judge what's going to happen. But those are two important runoffs on the Republican side. And again, you can read my article to get a full picture of all the races we're covering. We're covering quite a few. On the Democratic side, we've got a runoff in the 24th district which is the seat of Kenny Marchant, who's retired, and the Republicans nominated Beth Van Dun in their primary there. And this is a battle between Kim Olson, who was the nominee for Agricultural Commissioner in 2018. He's a retired Air Force colonel, running against Candice Valenzuela, who's really gained some attention in the last few weeks on Twitter. She's a more progressive challenger, and she has the support of 4 prominent U.S. senators: Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Elizabeth Warren, and I think the last one's Tammy Duckworth. I'd have to check. I put it in my article. But going over those, it's just very interesting to see the outcome in that race. There was an internal poll there that had Valenzuela up by double digits over Kim Olson, and I'm not going to give too much credence to an internal poll, but I would say Valenzuela is probably a favorite tonight, and that'll certainly be good for Texas progressives who are still kind of lamenting their failure to defeat Henry Cuellar in the primary earlier this year. And the final one I wanted to talk about, another one progressives we're watching tonight, is in Mike McCall's seat in the 10th district, which was actually carried by Beto O'Rourke. And the primary is between Mike Siegel, who is a progressive candidate, and he was the nominee in 2018. And despite being a progressive, he came very close to winning the seat last time. He fell about 3.5 percentage points short of winning. He's being challenged by Pritesh Gandhi, who is a physician. So that's going to be interesting in terms of another runoff. Those are just a few races that we're going to be covering tonight. But we're pretty much covering all the competitive congressional runoffs here for seats that when we decide to cover elections, we cover runoffs for races that are competitive in November, and we also cover runoffs for races that may be leaning towards one side or the other, basically safe seats, because those primaries are tantamount to the general election.
And for perspective on those seats, the 23rd district is located. It's in the Rio Grande Valley. That's we have the seat that leans likely Democratic. It's a Hillary Clinton seat that voted for Will Hurd by a small margin in 2018. And then the 24th district is in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then the 10th it stretches from Austin, some of the Austin suburbs, to Harris County. And then the 31st is also another Austin area district, although I think it's based more in Round Rock and some of the suburbs in the north.
And the 22nd is based in Fort Bend County primarily. These
are all over the state. Yeah, these are all over the state.
But just one pattern that I talked about in the article is, as you know, these are suburban seats for the most part that are becoming more competitive because there are positive trends for the Democrats in these seats. In terms of the swing seats, obviously, the Democrats have no hope in seats like Texas 13. We're just covering those because the winner of the primary is going to be the next congressman.
Right. Just going back to Will Hurd's 2018 victory in Texas 23, it's worth noting that Will Hurd one of the key factors in his victory was the New York Times aims, for those who remember, they did the live polling, and Will Hurd had a significant lead in the poll. I don't remember exactly what the margin was. I think it was something in the neighborhood of 10 points, if any of you remember. Is that right? And so that really dried up a lot of his opponents, Gina Ortiz's Jones fundraising. And I think one Democratic line group canceled their ads they're planning on airing, and then Hurd went on to win by 900 votes or something to that effect. So this is a district that if the Democrats didn't give up a month before, they would have won, or probably would have won. And now you don't have the advantage of Will Hurd. You have a much greater fundraising advantage, but still critical who the Republicans pick in this primary. But again, likely they.
And another note on the 23rd district specifically is that with the 22nd and 24th, as well as the 31st, we are seeing that the seats are concentrated in urban or suburban areas, mainly suburban areas, in the major regions like Dallas, Houston, and Austin. And the 23rd is actually no different. In fact, a large chunk of the population of the 23rd comes from the suburbs of San Antonio, in fact. And so even though it appears that it is rural, because it does stretch from San Antonio over to near El Paso, a large constituency of the population there does live in the San Antonio suburban area, which has leaned Republican historically. But now with Trump's narrow victory there, we're seeing that start to change as well with all the other cities in the state.
Yeah, now we're going to go to Kraz Greinitz, who wants to talk about the 24th district, which he wrote an article on earlier this year.
Yeah, so the 24th is going to be one of the runoffs we're watching tonight between Candace Valenzuela and Kim Olson, as Harrison mentioned. This district is actually a very interesting one because it's one that was totally off the radar for Democrats for pretty much the entire 2018 cycle. I believe it was about a Trump plus 10 district, and Democrats didn't seriously contest it. Their nominee in 2018 was the same nominee they had in 2016. She was outraised about 10 to 1, outspent about 10 to 1. She had very little name recognition, and she actually came within a couple points of unseating Kenny Marchant, the longtime incumbent there. This was a district that was won by Beto O'Rourke by 3.5 points, so it was actually significantly to the left of the state, which is important because Texas right now is looking very competitive. It's looking like it did in 2018, and if that holds and Biden carries the district, this is going to be another pickup opportunity. So, like Harrison said, Valenzuela more progressive, Olson more moderate, but this is a critical runoff to watch for November.
Yes, and we have breaking news to move in. It's now 8 o'clock on the East Coast, which means polls have closed in Texas, Alabama, and Maine. So we're going to be having results hopefully in shortly. As you know, rapid-fire election results are a thing of the past during the coronavirus, but we should be able to get some numbers here shortly to judge how some of the races are going to start off.
Mainly out of Alabama, too. Alabama had a lot more in-person voting today than Maine or Texas, who were a lot more focused on mail-in voting and the absentee ballots voting that we've seen throughout the coronavirus pandemic. So I think we'll probably see a lot more out of Alabama today. And I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to call a lot of Alabama today, too.
Yes, and real quick, looking at the Alabama runoffs, there's some very interesting things going on in the first and second districts. In the first district, it's between Bill Hightower and Jerry Carl. And Jerry Carl is a commissioner for Mobile County, and he managed to win all the counties in the district in the first round of voting over Hightower. So it's going to be a close race, but Mobile County actually casts, I believe I wrote in my article, about half the primary vote overall in terms of the Republican electorate. So if he can put up a strong margin there and perform well over Hightower and other regions of the district, you could see Carl winning. I would say Hightower probably has more political experience, but Carl has the local name recognition, and he's from the most important county in the district. In the second, there's a businessman running named Jeff Coleman, and he has the support of Martha Roby, who is retired from that congressional seat. But one thing to watch is his challenger, Barry Moore, is endorsed by Club for Growth. And as you know, we've had some successful Club for Growth bids for Congress in recent weeks. The most prevalent one in our minds being Georgia's 7th district, where Rich McCormick crushed Renee Unterman, who was a state legislator in that primary, to take the congressional nomination there. So it's going to be interesting to see. And another thing I wanted to talk about is for the seat of Bill Flores in Texas, which a decade ago was held by Democrat Chet Edwards, but since then has become safe Republican. And it was Republican while Edwards held the seat. It's been Republican for a long time. And in its new form, it still is very Republican. The most favorable rating for Democrats that professional pundits give the seat is likely Republican. We rated it safe. It's interesting because Renee Swan, a healthcare executive who has the support of Bill Flores, is running there against Pete Sessions, who, as you know, is carpetbagging to the seat from his old seat, the 32nd in Houston, where he lost to Colin Outred by a fairly sizable margin last time in 2018. So it's unclear if voters are going to reject him for carpetbagging or how much Flores' endorsement holds here. If he succeeds, then he and Darrell Issa, both of whom, in the case of Issa, retired from Congress and in his case lost re-election last year, will be in Congress again in safe Republican seats where they do not have to worry about general election.
Mm-hmm.
Just to jump in there about Pete Sessions and carpetbagging, it's worth remembering of him that Sessions has represented, if I remember correctly,
his old seat in the 90s.
Yeah, he's represented about 6 different congressional districts in his time in Congress, if I remember that number correctly. And between all of those 6 seats, he's represented about less than an acre of Dallas continuously, and that's about it. And the thing about it is that Wells does not resemble the 32nd he was elected in, and he is carpetbagging in that sense. This district, the district that he's running in, the 17th, does contain a lot of territory that was in his district prior to 2005. They might still remember him, even if he is carpetbagging from Dallas, of course.
Quick little update here. We have results in from Decision Desk in Texas, but it appears to be filler data of some sorts because they have 93% reporting in Harris County, and that's doubtful to me. So I would say we hold off for a little bit. They could have filler data flowing in a lot of these races. I don't think we have actual results yet from Decision Desk.
Yep. And we do want to thank Decision Desk. They've let us, if you go to our website, you can find our landing pages. They've let us kind of host some of their results for the night on our website.
Yep.
Go to their website as well. You'll see all the results. They have all the races, all the house races and stuff, and we're going to be using some of their data tonight on the stream. So thank you to them for that.
Yeah, we're very thankful to Decision Desk, our friends there, for providing us with results and events for the 3 Senate races. And we're going to be using their results on their site for the House runoffs tonight as well. So we do appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some stuff in two precincts, one from Chilton County and one from Fayette County in Alabama. Tommy Tuberville has strong leads in both of these precincts so far, putting him out to a pretty early 70-30 lead with only 2 precincts in. So obviously nothing to say, but we are starting to get numbers now from Alabama. An early Tuberville lead to start off the night.
Yep. And one other random result, I actually forgot this was tonight. Puerto Rico is having their Democratic presidential primary as well. Joe Biden has won it. He's leading around 68% of the vote to around 13.5% for Bernie. This is obviously a foregone conclusion, but it was a result from tonight, so I figure I would at least mention that Biden has won their Democratic primary. Although Bernie will come out with some delegates. He has 3 delegates at the moment from Puerto Rico, and there's several more left to be allocated.
How does Puerto Rico, does anyone know how Puerto Rico's delegate allocation system works since they don't have congressional districts because they're not a state?
Mm-hmm. I would assume it might perhaps go by the counties or the towns, the entire. But at the moment, he's. I guess he would be pulling a certain percentage in each of in some of the districts. According to New York Times, who are covering the Puerto Rico, they have, I believe, 7 or 8 districts, and he's running above the point in some of them. Although actually, Bloomberg has won some delegates from Puerto Rico as well. He's polling at around 13% as well. So he has 2 delegates, and Bernie has 3. So his presidential campaign may be dead, but he is still winning a few delegates here and there from American territories.
Yes, like American Samoa. It's actually very interesting to look at.
Yeah.
At Bloomberg's unique support in the territories.
Yeah.
Yes, and we also have some, I'm not sure yet if it's filler data or if they are results on Decision Desk from Texas 10th District, where, and so far Mike Siegel, the 2018 nominee, has a 53-47 lead over Pritesh Gandhi, his opponent, a physician. Also in Texas 13, Ronnie Jackson, the former White House physician, is leading Josh Weingarten 61-39 with some early results in from that district as well.
We have early results, I think, maybe from the 22nd as well. I'm pretty sure it's just filler data at the moment, but it's a pretty huge lead for Troy Nels over Kathleen Wall right now. All of Fort Bend came in. It's about an 80-20 lead right now for Troy Nels, but again, this could just be filler data. I do not think 100% of Fort Bend is now for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, but either way, it's kind of the same thing when we saw David Richter last week have such a big lead in Ocean County with the early numbers. So this could be this could be still a good sign, though, for Troy Nels in this runoff race for Republicans.
Yeah, I think that, Fort Bend County has about, 700,000 people in it, so there's definitely still probably at least as that many votes still left out to count in Fort Bend. So I think it's too early to project anything from these results. What I do think is interesting about Alabama, though, we just got from Cherokee County, Tuberville is leading Sessions in that one precinct, 66-34. I'm personally expecting to see some kind of a north-south split between how the counties vote, because at least that's how the first round went in March.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sessions performed very well.
I can pull up those.
Yes. So we'll have Eric
Yeah.
pull up the map. Bradley Beer did very well in the counties around his first district. In
Right.
fact, out of all the counties he won, only one of them was outside of the first district, Concord County, and even then it was bordering the first. And Jeff Sessions did very well in the Huntsville area up north. Jeff Sessions also did well in the Black Belt regions of the state, including
Yeah.
Montgomery.
He's from
And
there. It makes sense.
Tuberville did well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Tuberville did well in rural counties along the Georgia border, in the Birmingham suburbs,
Mhm.
and Lee County, the home of Auburn University, where he is was the head football coach.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
you can see Byrne was able to get pretty close with his base of support basically just being concentrated in Mobile. Mobile is one of the larger cities in the state, so that was kind of a good base
Especially
of
in a
support for him.
Republican primary too. Yeah.
Yeah,
but
Bradley
obviously-
Barrett's contingent will be critical to whoever wins tonight because he got 25% of votes in the first round. So whoever his votes end up going to stands a good chance of taking the nomination.
Mhm.
Oh,
We
go
have
ahead.
early results though from Texas 24, that Democratic primary. Early results again, probably just for the results, but Candace Valenzuela leads Kim Olson 60-40 so far, and early results from Dallas and Denton County. She leads in both counties by about 1,000 vote margin in each, and we see an early lead for Candace Valenzuela in what people think will be a competitive Texas congressional district here once again.
Yeah, I'm thinking that a lot of this is filler data because in the Senate race results, DDHQ MBET has 94% reporting from Harris County, and that would just be impossible this early on in the night. So hopefully, as soon as they start getting numbers, those will start going up into the embeds. So at the moment, too early to call any races right now at our election team headquarters. It's just we don't have enough results in.
Yeah, I do also want to make one note about yeah, I do want to make one note about Texas's 22nd district. So Kathleen Wall, some of the early results don't look so good for her if they're not filler results. I would want to note for the viewers, though, that she actually ran for Congress 2 years ago as well. She ran in Texas's 2nd district, I believe.
Yes,
she spent a lot of money there. Came in 3rd place in the primary, barely cracked a quarter of the vote. So this is actually her 2nd time running for Congress. Back then, she did gain a reputation as somewhat of a more awkward or stiff campaigner. So if she does not put in a very strong performance tonight, I would say that probably would not be the most surprising thing ever, but we'll have to see the results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've actually just quickly adding on to that race before Eric moves on to talk about Maine's 2nd district. There were actually some polls conducted. One of them was internal, 2 of them were not. But I believe all of them showed Fort Bend County Sheriff Troy Nails in the lead. Kathleen Wall is a GOP donor who has a lot of money, but by moving around to a new district, that Fort Bend County is a big part of the district, and that's definitely an advantage for Nels. And what may be an advantage for him in the primary could be a disadvantage to him in the general election because this is a rapidly diversifying seat that's trending towards the Democrats, and frankly, it's just not good. It's not a good way to run your campaign if you're trying to out conservative each other in the primary. Because when you get to the general, Sri Preston Kulkarni is in a open seat this time, and that may actually yield an even better opportunity for him to pick it up than in 2018 when he narrowly lost. So that's worth looking at. But now we're going to go to Eric Cunningham to talk about Maine's 2nd district.
Yep. One other thing to note before that is that Jeff Sessions himself is originally from Mobile. This could be relevant. It could not be relevant. But obviously, that Bradley Byrne contingent will be very important in who wins that race. I did realize neglected to mention there is a runoff in Maine. Not a runoff. The election for the Maine's House district number 2. This is a district that voted for Donald Trump in 2016 by a considerable margin. It's primarily rural, a lot of white working class voters. Maine is one of the whitest states in the country, and Maine 2 is even wider than Maine as a whole. So this is a very big base of what you might call traditional or Trump-supporting voters. It's represented right now by Democrat Jared Golden, who is the Democratic nominee. He's kind of a mix of a more progressive candidate with some other issues, and he's generally deemed to have some sort of advantage in the district, primarily due to candidate quality on the Republican end. kind of by default, a lot of people have expected that Eric Brakey, who was the Senate nominee in 2018, they kind of expected that he would just be winning that race by name ID alone, but he's kind of been erratic and inconsistent, and there have actually been polls, and they've not been too favorable towards where he's sitting at the moment. The other two candidates involved are Adrian Bennett and Dale Crafts. Whoever wins in this race will go up against Jared Golden, obviously, and the seat might vote for Trump this time. It's generally considered to lean a little bit in his direction, although with the national support for Biden being very high at the moment, it's the sort of seat that could flip. But obviously, a lack of candidate quality, a lack of fundraising, and Golden being a fairly strong incumbent have kind of made the seat a little bit less of a sure grab for Republicans than they would have liked. But since I neglected mentioning that the first time, I figured I would go ahead and mention that now, because we've got a really good cross section of kind of that is a very Trumpy district. It's one of the prototypical Trump districts.
It is. But at the same time, just to add on to your analysis there, the district was represented by Mike Michoud for a long time, and he was a prominent Blue Dog Democrat. So when Maine 2 does elect Democrats, they're in the Blue Dog form, like Jared Golden. He's a member of the House Blue Dog Caucus, and or the Blue Dog Coalition, as it's technically called. But that's definitely beneficial for him, and the fact that Eric Brakey has been a less than capable opponent, he's still going to run a close race. It's a toss-up by us and most other prominent, actually, all the other prominent election forecasters have it as a toss-up. But if the tilt ratings were used, I would say that it probably tilts towards Jared Golden at this point, because Eric Brakey is not as good of a candidate so far as, and that's just what the evidence has shown us, not as good of a candidate as Jared Golden is.
Mm-hmm.
And
he's very much a libertarian.
If President Trump carries the second district, yes. I mean, you saw the flamethrower advertisement. It wasn't really an advertisement. Flamethrower video on Twitter a few weeks ago. But looking at Brakey versus his opponent, Jared Golden, certainly the presidential results there will play a big impact. If Biden can flip it, then Jared Golden's almost certainly winning. If President Trump ends up winning the second district again, that helps Brakey. But it doesn't completely sink Golden there, especially ranked choice voting. You have to remember ranked choice voting was what helped him win last time. It's what elected Jared Golden, because his opponent, Bruce Poliquin, won with a plurality in the first round. So it should help him again. And there's actually a referendum, and there was a very good article about this in the National Journal by Madeline Pisani, and it talked about that, how Mainers are proposing a referendum to get rid of ranked choice voting on the presidential level this year, meaning would only affect their congressional races. So there haven't been enough signatures for that yet, but if it happens, that certainly could cause a difference between the two races, a little discrepancy, but it's going to be interesting.
I think worth mentioning as well is that Maine 2 in 2016 was about 13 or 14 points to the right of the state of Maine as a whole. And it's definitely not as Democratic leaning as it once was. But my theory is that a Democrat in the mold of Golden or Biden or Janet Mills could do well enough to actually carry the district solely on the basis of not being named Hillary Clinton and, reverting to a more true to form, running about 8 or 9 points to the right of the state instead of 13.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think, with that seat too, on the Republican side, the issue I think that Brakely has, the last three Republicans to represent that seat, Cohen, Snow, and to a certain extent Polian, were all moderates in a different way or form. Brakely Brakely doesn't have that moderate advantage that historically Maine Republicans try to run with in competitive seats or races like that.
Mm-hmm.
It is true, but I mean, there have been some sorting of the parties. I mean, back in those days, when Cohen and Snow represented Maine 2, a lot of the Franco Americans who are like Paul LePage and those types of people were Democrats. I mean, Mike Michaud is a Franco American Maine representative, and he is definitely a different era of northern Maine politics than you would see today, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Just a quick little update, guys. It looks like the results from Decision Desk HQ right now our good friends. It looks like they are actually real numbers right now, not filler data anymore. There
Wow.
seem to be posts going on Twitter right now that indicate that these results are real. A lot of them are early votes. We just had analyst Niles Francis point out, or he retweeted that in the 23rd district, Gonzalez is up 55 to 45 right now with early data, and he's up 58-42 in Bexar County. So,
yeah. And the Texas race, do we want to talk about that Senate race? Because it's looking pretty decent. I mean, if you're Royce West, obviously some of the strong areas for MJ Hager haven't come in yet. She's probably going to do pretty well in the Austin area. She's doing pretty well in Bayard. The Valley is also going to be an interesting area to look at because neither of these candidates are Hispanic, so their vote may be a little bit different. In the 2018 race, you saw a Hispanic candidate do better there than Beto O'Rourke on the vote, but there's not a candidate like that who is on there at the moment. But actually, yeah. So right now, Hager is leading in Harris County, which is Houston. She's leading in Dallas County, and she's leading in Tarrant County, which are both Dallas-Fort Worth.
All big vote centers, very important, especially in a Democratic primary.
Yep, it is worth noting she's not leading in the counties that are surrounding Dallas-Fort Worth. So she's not leading. So, for example, Rockwall County, which is right next. It's a small county right next to Dallas. She's not leading there, or he's not leading there. He's not leading in Johnson, Orrin Parker, Hood, Denton. Those counties are all surrounding the Dallas-Fort Worth area, or those two major counties, Dallas and Tarrant. So he may just be doing well in those urban counties or more urban counties, but we obviously need to see further results. Whereas in the Harris area, Houston area, she's winning all of those counties at the moment.
And I was talking about in my article for the Texas Senate runoff that even though polls had Hager as a definitive favorite, that the runoff would probably end up being closer than it was expected to be. And I think most people on election Twitter expected that. I mean, West has been gaining a lot of attention in recent weeks. He has the endorsement of many prominent African-American members of Congress. I mean, the Majority Whip, Jim Clyburn, the Financial Services Committee Chairwoman Maxine Waters, Al Green from Houston. And I think Eddie Bernice Johnson and Sheila Jackson Lee, also two prominent Democratic representatives from VRA seats in Texas, they also endorsed him as far as I can remember. So
yeah, then that's a dynamic here, right? Because Royce West is black, whereas MJ Hager is a white woman. That's there's kind of a racial dynamic there to some degree. Obviously, he's kind of gotten some of the support from some of those senior members of the Democratic caucus in Texas, very highly respected within the delegation and within the state in general in terms of the Democratic side.
And MJ Hager running for Senate has had implications in the 31st district because, as you know, she made that race against John Carter very, very close last time around. But it's unclear. Right now the race is rated as likely Republican, and it should be competitive, but we don't yet know if it's going to be able to be as competitive as it was in 2018 with MJ Hager as the nominee there. So we're going to have to watch that race. I wanted to briefly pivot to Alabama so we could have a discussion there because we've got more results in. And Jeff Sessions is currently leading early votes in Tuscaloosa, which he did win in the first round. But I also wanted to point out in Coffee County and Covington County, Tommy Tuberville has early leads there. And we also have Houston County reporting with 7% in. And it's interesting to look at because Sessions won the southeastern corner of the state in the first round, that second district region. So now that other candidates have suspended and those votes coalesce, it'll be interesting to see if the southeast flips to Tuberville as those votes coalesce around him. And it'll be interesting to see if the Bradley Byrne contingent, because Jeff Sessions is from Mobile, where that goes. If it goes to Sessions, if it goes to Tuberville, that's 25% of the electorate. So that is a pretty big chunk. And as I said earlier, that could make or break either candidate in tonight's runoff.
Well, and to piggyback off that, I think how that vote, that not Sessions vote, or the not Sessions, not Tuberville vote coalesces is going to be a critical question because Sessions' biggest weakness post first primary round, was that he did not even really come close to 50. He actually finished second, and he's someone who likely has virtually 100% name recognition amongst the Republican primary electorate. So, Bradley Byrne, you could argue, might be a slightly closer ideologically and stylistically to Sessions than he is to Tuberville. But the fact that Sessions, pulled so low in that first round with, being the Attorney General of the United States, 2 years ago, did spell trouble. And if that vote, if we see that vote, that not Sessions, not Tuberville vote starts to coalesce into Tuberville more, then I think it's going to be a race that's headed towards Tuberville, although we have to see a lot more data.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth noting, of course, that Tommy Tuberville was the head coach at Auburn, and Tuscaloosa is where the University of Alabama is located.
Alabama, yeah.
That could actually be a factor in the sort of race.
Oh, yeah.
The Tuscaloosa-Lee County divide will be very critical because we could see both candidates putting up massive margins opposite of each other in both counties.
Yeah. This sort of stuff matters in the South. It matters in and I mean,
especially in Alabama.
Auburn and Alabama do not like each other. They're to say the least.
That's understating it. That's understating it.
Real quick, I wanted to. Yeah, sorry, you can go ahead.
Oh no, just to piggyback what Kratz said about Jeff Sessions. I think a lot of this still goes back to how he was dismissed as the Attorney General by Trump, because the argument by many on the Trump wing of the party is that Sessions didn't defend the president enough when he was Attorney General, and arguably one could say that a lot of that anger has regressed into voting against Sessions at the primary level with this race.
Yes, and I wanted to briefly pivot to another Alabama race, the runoff in the 2nd district. And like I was saying earlier, you don't want to count out Barry Moore, who's endorsed by Club for Growth, even though businessman Jeff Coleman has been endorsed by Martha Roby. Currently, with just a few early votes in, Barry Moore is leading Jeff Coleman by a 53-47 margin. So, again, we could have a lot of close runoffs tonight. And back in Texas, in fact, in the 13th, that race has tightened up. Ronnie Jackson's lead is now just 53-47. Mike Siegel's leading Pritesh Gandhi, 51-49. Very close there. And one final thing to touch on as well, in the 17th, Pete Sessions is leading Renee Swan, 52-48. So that's another close race.
Something that I want to bring up is a down ballot race in Texas. It's the 27th Senate District, where Eddie Lucio was drawn into a runoff. He's been a state senator since 1991, and he is notable for being very socially conservative. He is one of the examples people give when they say that the Rio Grande Valley is Democratic, not liberal. And he was drawn into a runoff, surprisingly, and is currently up 2%.
All right, guys, stand by for an important projection at Elections Daily. Elections Daily, our election team can now project that Troy Nehls will defeat Kathleen Wall, the GOP donor, to win the runoff in Texas's 22nd district. He comes from Fort Bend County, where he is the sheriff, and that composes a large part of the 22nd district. So Nehls will be advancing on to face Sri Preston Kulkarni in the 22nd district in November, a race that is rated by Elections Daily as a toss-up.
And sorry.
This to me personally is not a big surprise. Personally, I mean, we saw some Kathleen Wall came out with some hard ads against Troy Nehls in the lasting weeks coming up to this primary. But Nehls just had that voter base. He had that voter base in Fort Bend. The Republican voters knew him there. He was known in the most popular districts, which was big. So to me, it's not too big of a surprise. But and you could argue that Nehls was probably a slightly better candidate for Wall than Wall. But this is definitely still going to be probably one of the closest congressional races in Texas, and maybe one that if it continues to get worse for the Republican Party throughout the election cycle, this is a race that we could very quickly start to see lean towards Democrats.
Well, with this district, certainly something to remember is that Nehls looked a bit like the favorite when about 2 weeks ago you saw Wall went on the air with a extremely aggressive ad trying to tie Walls as the sheriff to some, to my knowledge, an unsolved sex trafficking in case, and just very aggressive ads that came off as too much and seems like only came off as too much and kind of desperate to some of the electorate in Fort Benton County that are more familiar with Walls as, oh, he's the guy who's been our sheriff for a while and, you know, done a reasonably good job.
Yeah. Yeah, so Troy Nell's the winner, and we've seen some results slowly start to come in other races as well. Tony Gonzalez up in the Republican runoff over Raul Reyes on in this Lake Lean Blue district. This is where Will Hurd has retired, and this is where we expect Gino Ortiz Jones to probably come out. I believe we have it as Lean D on the elections daily team. It might be likely D. I don't know for sure.
Yeah,
it's likely D.
Yep.
Elections daily has it rated as likely D. So this is going to be a very tough race for Gonzalez to run, but people do consider him probably the stronger of the two candidates. Reyes is considerably more right-wing than Gonzalez is, who has taken a lot more from Will Hurd than he has the president, but we still expect this, especially in a presidential year where the president is likely to not do very well in this district, for this to likely be a Democratic flip.
Mm-hmm. And if we have time, I'd like to kind of send it back to Andrew to kind of finish up his thoughts on the Eddie Lucio race, because it is interesting. He's a very pro-life Democrat, for example. He's one of the very well known for that.
Oh yeah, Lucio has had a target on his back for years. Progressives have tried to find someone to run against him, but there's a problem of him, his son, all are institutions within the Brownsville, McAllen area, and they just bring a lot of money in. And because he votes with conservatives on social issues and whatnot, he ends up getting a lot of pork for his district when it comes to budgeting. And that allows him to essentially bribe his constituents during primaries. And it looks like it's going to be a close election. So we'll see.
All right, guys, we have a projection at Elections Daily. Our elections team can project that Democrat Sarah Gidgen, the former Speaker of the Maine State House, will win the Democratic primary to face Republican Senator Susan Collins in November. So that is our first projection in a Senate primary tonight.
Yeah, and this, if I could chime in on Maine, this race is fascinating to me because it's one of the most impactful races on the Senate map this cycle. But at the same time, there's been a dearth of high-quality, nonpartisan polling coming out of the state. You know, we have whispers of what each party's internal numbers say. You know, obviously, occasionally we've gotten some approval polls for Susan Collins and some head-to-head matchups. But, you know, in comparison to how some other races, some other states are being polled, we really don't know what's going on in the Maine Senate race. And that's despite, you know, it being a state that could easily swing the balance of power. So hopefully now that the primary is over, you know, we're going to get more polls. But, you know, this is a fascinating one because we really don't know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it's worth on that. Sorry.
Oh no, just on that note with the Senate race with Maine, it's also fascinating that, you know, for Susan Collins, you know, for years she never had any issues with her races, but with that one decisive vote on Brett Kavanaugh, her entire image that she's had for an entire career is now shifted, and arguably, she very much could end up in the same fate that her, the person she admires the most, Margaret Chase Smith, ended up with in 1972, losing a Senate race in a very, you know, brutal fashion.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to mention the three candidates in the Democrat race aside from Sarah Gidgen. She was obviously endorsed by most Democrats. She's the favorite nominee, and she won, obviously, as we've called the race so early. The other two, Elizabeth Sweet was really someone who progressives tried to support. Brand new Congress endorsed her. Bernie endorsed her. Justice Democrats endorsed her. But she just wasn't able to pick up steam, even though Maine is a state that's kind of, you would think would be on paper pretty favorable for Bernie. And I just want to mention this because I find this candidate hilarious. The third candidate is Bree Kidman, who has basically built herself as a queer feminist mermaid, and that's her words to describe herself. Obviously, she's not really gone anywhere, but I wonder why. That was what she ran as, and obviously that the progressive vote kind of got picked up by Elizabeth Sweet. That messaging didn't seem to really work off for Bree Kidman, but Elizabeth Sweet's definitely going to be. I would be interested to see what her margins are in some of the more progressive areas of Maine, like Portland, which is in the first district. I would be interested to see how that goes.
I think that with Maine, one thing that I think Maine is a fan of Bernie himself, but not necessarily people who style themselves after Bernie. Or I mean, Bernie represents. I mean, he's got good experience representing a very white, very rural constituency, very similar to what Maine is. And I mean, if you look at people like Troy Jackson, who is the state Senate president in Maine, he's a very pro-Bernie guy representing an extremely Trumpy district in the far north of Maine, in Aroostook County. And so I think that, Maine is one of the few places where cross-partisan elasticity is still very much a thing. The question is how much of it is left for Susan Collins to win by, because she hasn't dropped the county since 1996. And her approval polling, that's the one thing we do have, and it's fairly good, is that her approval rating with Democrats has plummeted from what it used to be pre-Trump era. And, Maine is, somewhat more competitive than it used to be, but it's still, at the end of the day, a blue state. And there are more people on the left side of the center than there are on the right side of the center. And so if this race does become, a contest about Collins' approval, I would consider her in a very tough position. She could still win. I mean, she'll still have some residual crossover support, but I don't think she's going to get, her 65% landslides that she used to, even if she's.
Yeah, I like to think of Susan Collins in the Trump era as a rock in a hard place. She's being squished by her typical desire to keep up her moderate image, which technically she is still a centrist, even though Democrats do not view her as a centrist. Her approval, as Armin mentioned, has gone down among Democratic voters, which is very bad in a state that leans towards the Democrats, especially because you have a credible candidate here. So we're going to see probably her closest race that she's ever had, and definitely her most competitive race since she beat Brennan to take the seat in 1996. So it's going to be interesting to watch. And President Trump might just have done in senators like her, senators like Cory Gardner, Martha McSally.
The difference with Gardner is that, Collins at least, is very good at keeping up the image of being moderate. Yeah. Whereas Cory Gardner has openly touted how much he votes with Trump in a state that voted for Polis by double digits and likely will vote for Biden by.
Yes, I know. Pictures with Lauren Boebert.
Yeah, and now there's a QAnon fringe candidate on the ballot.
I didn't mean to say that they were as moderate. Susan Collins, I was simply saying that those are seats
blue state
that are being put in danger because they've been progressively away from Republicans, and that's only been exacerbated during Trump's presidency up to this date.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Gardner is, I think one of the telling things with him is, I think some of it, I think, is, I think the state's the national environment, but also I think Colorado is shifted a lot more. Even in 2014, running against arguably one of the worst run Democratic incumbent campaigns for Mark Udall. He only won, I believe, 49-44 or 49-54, something in that ballpark range, which for the type of year he was running in and the wave here really wasn't impressive, and maybe should have started some alarm bells that if in a worse environment he could be in trouble, which he very well might be with Hickenlooper running against him.
Yeah,
but Hickenlooper actually won re-election as governor in that same year in 2014. Hickenlooper was re-elected even as the Senate race flipped to the Republicans.
And Colorado was also much less. Colorado is an ancestrally Republican state.
Yeah,
it still had some of that DNA back then, and it didn't have as many transplants bringing liberal ideology with them from out of state as it does now, which is why I don't think the same fundamentals are there for Gardner to make lightning strike in a bottle twice.
Oh yeah, I agree.
One word of caution I want to mention with some of the approval polling. I do not doubt her approvals are relatively low at the moment. But if you look at if you look at almost all of these polls that mention her approval, for example, the most recent public policy poll back in July, a lot of her poor approvals are with soft approval among Republicans. My word of caution here is that these Republicans will ultimately almost certainly go out to turn up for Susan Collins, specifically because of ranked choice voting. There's not really an outlet for them unless they just choose not to vote for her. Obviously, this is a Democratic state. It voted for Hillary Clinton by several percentage points. It's been Democratic for years. But the fact that a lot of, for example, her approvals right now in the public policy poll, which is the most recent public poll, she's at 68% approval among Donald Trump voters, 22% disapprove, 10% don't know enough to have an opinion. That's not great, but you would expect that number to be a little better, and that probably will turn around a little bit. So some of that poll, so even though her poll approval overall is 55 disapprove, 36 approve in that poll, when it comes down to the actual vote, it will look different than that. That's all I would caution with those numbers. And this is consistent. I've seen a lot of these polls in Maine is a soft approval among Republicans, which has always been a thing for her. She ultimately wins, but a lot of the base, the more conservative end, aren't happy she's so moderate.
Well, yeah, the main GOP primary voters would prefer someone like Paul LePage.
Oh boy. Who managed to beat Michael McCaul?
Mike Michaud again.
Yeah, Mike Michaud,
yes, yeah. I know.
Sorry, the French names get me. Who he happened to beat him somehow by a stroke of luck in 2014.
I mean, yeah. The rumor is they passed ranked choice voting in Maine so that he would never get elected again.
I would not doubt.
And as I talked about earlier, there was a good article from Madeline Pisani at the National Journal today that talked about how Mainers and particularly Republican Mainers are pushing to get a ballot referendum this November to get rid of ranked choice voting. And if it gets enough signatures, it's actually not going to be in effect for the presidential race. It would still be in effect for the congressional elections and state legislative elections, but it would not end up being in effect in the presidential race, which could pose a interesting impact there.
So some updates from races in Texas right now, guys. In the 17th congressional race GOP primary, Pete Sessions has expanded his lead over Renee Swan, the former congressman from, I forget where it was now, but the former congressman from the 31st district, who is now seeking to win in a different race. He is up by 11 percentage points, 55 to 44 over Renee Swan right now, with a big lead of that coming from McLennan County, where he has a 1,000 vote lead right now, with apparently around 49% of the results reporting there. Again, we don't know. And in the Texas Senate race as well, MJ Hagar has retaken the lead. She leads by 0.6 percentage points over Royce Resta right now. And we expect Austin results to come in right now. Apparently, those are good for Hagar, so we expect her to stay in the lead once those Austin results come in. The big thing we're looking at here is that most of the Rio Grande and El Paso area has not come in yet, so obviously we're looking at that too. But it's starting to look better and better for Hagar as the night goes on.
Yeah.
Real quick.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention with Texas is I have a friend who lives in the area and pointed out that if you look at the map, you can kind of see where more of the black voters live in the state. Specifically, he's doing really well in East Texas, which is the portion of Texas that's most closely aligned with the Deep South. For example, right. Jefferson County, which is has a
Beaumont.
Substantial black population, he's winning their 76 to 23 at the moment. That's really good, and that's kind of indicative of kind of how he's doing in East Texas. But obviously, East Texas is not the majority of Texas, and he's going to need to do better in places like Austin, San Antonio, and El Paso whenever those ultimately come in, which is kind of the word of caution. You notice, if you look at the map of Texas at the moment, a lot of this is coming from Dallas, Tarrant, Jefferson, Houston, those sorts of areas. But there's a lot of areas that MJ Hager is doing very well in. There are places that are like that have yet to report. So even though it's pretty close at the moment, it could shift later.
And I wanted to briefly touch on the other race that Joe mentioned in the 17th House District, the runoff. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a very interesting race because, as Armin brought up with Adam, Sessions represented a lot of that territory in the early part of his career back in the 90s. But as of late, he has not represented that territory in almost 2 decades at this point. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the voters take that. I mean, right now he's ahead of Renee Swan, but Bill Flores, the incumbent, has actually endorsed Renee Swan. Now, it's going to be weird. We're going to have to see how much of a play incumbent endorsements actually have in primaries by the end of the night, because Will Hurd's made an endorsement, Bill Flores has made an endorsement, Arthur Roby's made an endorsement. And so far, we don't know if any of these will be successful, but Gonzalez is leading, so Hurd's endorsement may actually be successful there. So we're going to have to wait and see, but it is very possible that Pete Sessions could be going back to Congress. And that's very similar to what Darrell Issa has done out in California's 50th place.
Although the 49 and 50 are, kind of right next to each other. So it isn't as a blatant an example of carpetbagging as, going 200 miles south from Dallas to an Austin-based district with a bunch of rural population.
But again, this is why these primaries in a lot of these Texas districts, like the 17th and the 13th, are so interesting, because they're tantamount to the election. The winner of these primaries is going to be the winner of the general election, almost certainly. So,
yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of the 13th,
yeah, that was.
How is the Candyman doing?
Yeah. No, it's just gonna. Jackson is leading Josh Weingartner with 18,138 votes to Weingartner's 15,709, about a 53-46 advantage.
I see.
The 13th is quite literally the most Republican seat in the nation.
It is. Yeah.
It's like a district that Trump got at least 80% of the vote in.
It's the complete opposite of it's the complete opposite of a district like Jose Serrano's seat, which is the most Democratic in the country.
Yeah,
I would say it's kind of weak sauce compared to that, because the Serrano seat only gave Romney like 2% of the vote, whereas the 13th, Democrats can still pull 15 to 20% there.
Congressional Democrats in Serrano's seat always get 95% or more, essentially.
Yeah, whereas the 13th is like it's like an 85 to 15 or an 80 to 20 district.
Yeah,
just because it's harder to get that. There are urban areas in the district that vote for a larger portion of
Amarillo is the largest vote sink for the primary, right?
Yes. And the interesting thing with the seat is it's Mac Thornberry, the outgoing member for the seat, has endorsed Weingartner, but Jackson has been very heavily supported by President Trump.
Right. Mac Thornberry is much more of a more mainstream, old school, traditional Republican.
Yeah. And it's going to be interesting as well, because that's yet again another incumbent endorsing someone who may not win the primary. And there are so many examples tonight of that in runoffs where the incumbent has endorsed the successor. I mean, a lot of these seats in Texas are open this year. I mean, the Tex exit was very big this year, more retirements than any other state in the country. So,
yeah. Do you want to kind of go over some of the Alabama stuff that's coming in? Because there's actually a good amount of votes that are coming in from Alabama at the moment. Tuberville is leading 59 to 41 at the moment with around 19,000 votes in. He's doing pretty well outside of course, Tuscaloosa, where he's losing. He's also he's winning. Sorry, Tuscaloosa is where Tuberville is losing. Monroe County, which is in the Black Belt, it's a diverse county, and then Dale County, as well as Morgan, which is in the Huntsville area. That's an area that Jeff Sessions did very well in the primary. So at the moment, that's kind of where things stand. Obviously, more votes are going to come in. A lot of the big counties aren't in yet, although, for example, some votes are in from Montgomery, from Jefferson. But to get a real picture of what this is going to look like, we need votes to come in from mainly Mobile. Is going to play a really big part in how things go here.
Yeah, and I think that Alabama, we're going to be able to start making some conclusions soon within the next few minutes. Particularly in the Senate race, I could see a call from us coming in 1 or 2 minutes or so here. I mean, it's early, but DDHQ's actually already called it for Tuberville. Tuberville's leading right now, and it appears he's going to pick up the southeastern part of the state from Sessions.
Yeah, no, yeah, you wouldn't expect Tuberville to win the Wiregrass, but clearly he's doing something right, and his margins up in what make up the 4th congressional district are even better than you'd expect. And I mean that makes sense because they're very populist, like MAGA loving type people. Alabama's 4th is, I think, the other district that gave Trump 80+% of the vote in the country. But yeah, no, Sessions really seems to be underperforming in the non-Bradley Byrne areas of southern Alabama. Besides the Black Belt, which doesn't cast votes in large enough numbers for Republicans.
And I'll say this about, I think this is just a personal thing. I think there's kind of this tendency to kind of overestimate the appeal of the populist wing of the party. It is ultimately a wing, and with Trump polling worse at the moment, it may just not be enough to carry things through, especially even if a candidate like Jeff Sessions, who's well known, who was unopposed in 2014, if he's not able to pull off that type of support now, that's kind of telling about kind of the strength of some of that sort of movement. It could be that Trump endorsement. It could be that he is just so unpopular with base Republican voters at this point because of what he did as Attorney General and because of Trump's just general disdain for him.
I think.
I mean, Trump.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Aaron. You can go first.
I was going to say, I think it's important to make a distinction between, being ideologically populist and being stylistically populist. Because Sessions is definitely ideologically not a populist. He's on like economic issues, and he's definitely much more of a traditional conservative. But in terms of how he styles himself, whereas Tuberville is much more of an out there like fire and brimstone populist, so to speak.
All right, we have an important projection now in the Alabama Senate race where we can project that former Auburn head coach Tommy Tuberville will defeat former Senator Jeff Sessions to win the nomination to take on Senator Doug Jones, the incumbent Democrat, in November in a race that he is heavily favored to win. We rate this race as safe Republican. Other outlets rate it as lean or likely Republican. But clearly Doug Jones, despite having a strong war chest, is not popular enough to pull a significant amount of Trump-Jones voters to win re-election. So it is very likely that Tommy Tuberville will end up being Alabama's junior senator next January.
And really, I think a big story of this is really this downfall of Jeff Sessions, arguably in the last 36 months. The beginning of the Trump era, Jeff Sessions was one of those powerful people in the Republican Party, the establishment voice to Trump. And now in 2020, he's lost a race that 6 years ago he was running easily around, and I think it's very much in Sessions' case almost a Sicilian tragedy of a career basically lost because of pissing off the president of the United States.
And well, to chime in on that too, people forget, but Sessions was one of Trump's key early endorsers. In that
he was the first senator to endorse him.
He was.
Yeah, what was he? Yeah. So I mean, remember at the time it was a big deal.
Ironic.
He was
Trump. Yeah, and it was so it was a big deal at the time because Ted Cruz, who was trying to match Trump on immigration in many ways, had been going around saying, my good friend Jeff Sessions, we've worked together to curb harmful illegal immigration. And then, kind of out of nowhere, I remember Jeff Sessions coming out and says, well, that's great that you consider me a friend, but I'm endorsing Donald Trump for president. And that was a major turning point in the primary. And then Trump made him attorney general for it. And like Pete said, he's gone from being this incredibly powerful senator attorney general to watching his seat flip to Democrats in an unprecedented special election. And then now losing in a primary to, a football coach who, if the news reports are to be believed, he hasn't even voted in Alabama, in years, if ever. So, this is really quite the turnaround for him.
Yeah. And the Jeff Sessions thing, I think that it's the disdain for that a lot of he endeavored as attorney general. That was his dream job. He had been this has been something he wanted to do for years. Goes from being unopposed in 2014 to getting that job, seeing a Senate seat be lost, and now losing a primary.
I think, if Sessions could look back on this whole, the whole thing, everything that's developed for his career during Trump's administration, in the long run, it was all futile. It was all in vain. It was all negative. Because if he had just stayed in the Senate, Doug Jones would have never become relevant. and he would have held his Senate seat. But I mean, people work in the short time, and Sessions made a reactionary decision. He can't be blamed for it because at the time that was the good career decision to, he was in Trump's favor at that point. But as we've seen throughout Trump's administration, the turnover rate is very high, and he fell on cold ice and he fell out of his favor, and this is one example so far of Trump certainly hitting a mark on his endorsement record that has been rather subpar in recent weeks. This is a big win, and if Ronnie Jackson wins, the president will for sure be able to claim that he's had 2 successful primary endorsements in this election.
And one thing I just want to mention before we kind of pass off to kind of explain more of our senatorial rating, the reasoning behind our decision, which is a little bit different than some other outlets have the race at, is it's literally burned in my mind. Jeff Sessions was the anti-establishment Republican. Like Ted Cruz, the phrase that's burned in my mind is Ted Cruz saying over and over and over again, every rally, that he stood shoulder to shoulder with Jeff Sessions and Steve King. He said that at every single rally he was at. And ultimately, to see Jeff Sessions endorse Trump and then lose his political career, I think it's probably a good. Ted Cruz is probably thinking it's a good thing that he's not having to stand shoulder to shoulder with him now, given the career path that's kind of gone on there with both him and Steve King obviously being out of Congress.
Gone.
Well, I mean, Jeff Sessions is not, adjacent to neo-Nazis like Steve King.
Sure.
But
in the anti-immigration movement, he
does have a certain
level
of cachet. I mean, one of his proteges is Stephen Miller, who is, the big architect of lots of Trump's immigration measures. So, yeah, it really must sting for him to, I guess, to quote Palpatine, he could save others, but not himself.
And if I could chime in a little bit on Alabama, I just want to explain a little bit of our general election rating because it is different than most other outlets. Obviously, me and Adam do the Senate rating, so he's if Adam wants to chime in on anything here, but just to explain our rating a little bit, Alabama is one of the most inelastic states in the country, and the reason that's the case is because it has a lot of rural, a lot of evangelical and non-college educated white voters, and a lot of black voters. And those are 2 groups that are solidly very partisan. Obviously white evangelicals are inelastically Republican and black voters are usually inelastically Democratic. So there really aren't a whole lot of voters that will split their tickets for anyone, let alone someone like Doug Jones, who, to be honest, has been a pretty party line vote, an establishment liberal, so to speak. Approval rating for a Democrat in Alabama is impressive, but nowhere where it needs to be in order to win re-election. The only crossover voters, in this day and age that could save Doug Jones would be, moderate, college-educated suburbanites that might go Trump and, but back Jones. The problem is Trump's going to win Alabama by far too large a margin for them to make a difference. There aren't enough of them in Alabama to deliver Jones a victory. And the college-educated white population in Alabama is disproportionately more evangelical, living in less dense, less cosmopolitan, so to speak, suburbs than college-educated whites in other states. So as we see it, there just is not a realistic path for Jones.
Yeah, if Biden actually won Alabama by 25, then he'd be winning every state. There is no mathematical scenario where it works.
That's how red Alabama really is, and it just makes it so impressive. I mean, even looking at Roy Moore in the 2017 special election, one of the big reasons that Jones won, low turnout. I mean, remember, Jones won still only carrying 1 congressional district. And he just barely beat Moore, who in any other state, essentially, that was remotely more competitive, would have been blown out in a landslide. And Roy Moore, he could have won had the election occurred in a presidential year where you had a strong Republican who's popular at the top of the ticket in a state like Alabama, like President Trump. Then Roy Moore would have been able to win. So that just shows you, basically, like Kraz said, how done Senator Jones is. And unfortunately for him, there really aren't enough voters that are going to split their districts. It's not elastic enough for him to be able to hold the seat in a full turnout presidential year with a strong Republican at the top of the ticket. And let's face it, Tommy Tuberville, there have been these developments accusing him of not suspending for long enough a player that was involved in, I believe, a rape allegation. But I don't see that playing as big of a role in voters' minds as the whole sexual controversy that surrounded Roy Moore did. And a lot of Republicans still voted for Roy Moore anyway, even after that. So, Alabama it's a very, very difficult state for Jones to be in. And I think that Senator Jones should have taken a better path and maybe moved to New Mexico to run for the open Senate seat.
He should have just run in Georgia, honestly.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to let Adam talk here about because he's the other member of our Senate team that comes up with our ratings. So.
Yep, and thank you to Kraz and Harrison. And on this, really, if you were to take the 2017 special margins and then apply it to your standard presidential year, midterm year, really any other turnout you could possibly see, it's a Moore victory. I mean, really, Jones has had a perfect confluence of factors. I mean, you have the allegations against Moore. You have the best turnout for black voters you've seen really ever. You have astonishingly weak white turnout, and the boll weevil Dems. Tom Bevel's old district, Robert Aderholt's district. I know Armin's a big fan of Bevel. Sorry. I mean, really, you just see, everything that could go Doug Jones's way went Doug Jones's way, and then more. And we're just gonna, even if we were to get to some universe where Biden only loses Alabama by, say, 15 in the two-party vote. And that's very unlikely, even that. Let's just say, for hypothetical sake, Biden loses it by 15. Jones still has to win 13% of Trump voters, mathematically.
Very difficult
to win that. It's far too difficult.
Going off of what you said, just looking at red state Senate races in 2018, even though it was a solid environment for Dems, it was very good for the Democrats, and in most regions, particularly the suburbs, you saw a negative turn against Trump, and that's what led to Democrats basically picking up a net of 40 seats in the House. But in the Senate, you had Donnelly, McCaskill, Heitkamp, all senators in red states that Trump won by commanding margins, losing re-election to opponents that 6 years prior to that may have not done quite as well as they did this time. So, and even on the Senate level, if you look at the county margins, even in 2018, when you had McCaskill and Donnelly losing their seats, they still improved in Missouri's 2nd district, a suburban district, and Indiana's 5th district, a suburban district. So even as they lost and their margins decreased in rural areas, that ongoing trend for Democrats that's helping them in the suburbs, you even saw that even as they lost re-election last time. So it's very difficult for red state Democrats, and they continue to become casualties. There are very few left. Jones is pretty much the last one right now in the South. Once he's gone, unless Democrats flip a Senate seat in Georgia or North Carolina, he will be the last Democratic senator in the South, actually. So it's very interesting to look at, and red state Democrats are certainly struggling in the Trump era because these states aren't elastic enough for them to pull off enough votes, even in a midterm year.
Yeah, that elasticity is a big deal, right? Because Missouri, it's a very elastic state. It votes for Democrats down ballot still in some areas. Indiana has a long history of voting for down ballot Democrats. You look at these other states. North Dakota had a wholly Democratic delegation for a substantial amount of time. Alabama is not elastic at all. It's not like it's a state that occasionally votes down ballot. It's not elastic at all. And whatever Democrats it did support lost in 2010. It's gradually over the past 50 years, the Democrats have just gradually lost all of their influence as voters have transitioned to the other party, and just the older Democrats have died off. You saw 2010, both of the rural Democrats that had survived Obama's election in 2008 lost. They lost their control of the state legislature. Just at a pure level, if someone as popular as Scott Brown could not win Massachusetts, an absurdly elastic state, in 2012, it is almost unconscionable to suggest that Doug Jones could even come close in Alabama, a state that is more conservative than Massachusetts is Democratic. It voted for Trump by a larger margin than Hillary Clinton won in Massachusetts. It would be a surprise for me if Doug Jones even gets within 10 points. Just look at his approval ratings, the fundamentals, everything about this. Aside from the fact that Doug Jones is an incumbent, that's the one thing he has in his favor. That's
real quick. I want to address a comment mentioning Joe Manchin, Sherrod Brown, and John Tester. Yes, those are remaining red state Democrats, and those are states that are red on the presidential level, but it's not the same thing. Ohio is not as red on the presidential level as Alabama. Yeah, and same thing with North Dakota. I mean, all of those. I mean, Montana is a purple state below the presidential level. Before Steve Daines, they had 2 Democratic senators there, and now you've got Tester, who managed to win in 2018. The House special election in 2017 was close. The race between Kathleen Williams and Greg Gianforte was close. And the gubernatorial races are close. They have a Democratic governor. That's a purple state. That's different. It's red on the presidential level, but Alabama is not like that. Indiana, to an extent, is not like that, even though they had a close gubernatorial race last time. Same thing with Missouri, except Nicole Galloway. And North Dakota, for sure, is another one that's essentially solid Republican down ballot as well. So
yeah, I think talking about North Dakota, it's important to know that, I mean, the fundamental political DNA of the state has changed so much over the past 10 to 15 years. I mean, you had legends like Quentin Burdick and Kent Conrad and Byron Dorgan and Earl Pomeroy, and their constituencies were very much like farmers and people who were still loyal to the Democratic Party out of some kind of residual benefits that they used to get. Yeah, exactly. Adam says it's the whole prairie populism vibe that J.D. Scholten was trying to capture when he was running against Steve King. But in the recent years now, we've seen a boatload of oil and gas jobs in North and South Dakota that are bringing more conservative oil and gas people into the state and bringing their politics with them, and transforming how the economy of North and South Dakota is working. Which is why, I mean,
and it's important. I mean, red states and blue states can still have gubernatorial wins for the opposite party, because Senate elections are always going to be less elastic than gubernatorial elections. I mean, South Dakota is solid red. Trump's going to win it again by double digits, yet it had a competitive gubernatorial race last time. So, a state may be purple on one level, but on the federal level, it may not be as beneficial for the Democrats. Now, obviously, there are people like Joe Manchin and John Tester who are managing to hold on. Steve Bullock is going to give Daines another run for his money in Montana. And I understand the point that Shabbat was trying to make in the comments, but basically what I'm trying to say is we got a little bit off topic. Basically, it's not looking good long term for red state Democrats, even though some survived in 2018. It's not looking good for them long term. And Alabama is a lot less elastic than states like, I mean, even a state like West Virginia voted heavily for Trump last time. It was the second best state, yet they still had a close race.
Manchin won by 3 against an opioid
and John Perdue was elected down ballot. So
yeah, and the thing is, that's in doubt.
No, yeah. And also, to address on the flip side, it's also not looking good for blue state R's like Martha McSally, Cory Gardner, Susan Collins. Basically polarization is just never going to be good for someone who's representing a state that leans in the opposite direction of their party leanings.
Yeah, I should tell that to Jeff Van Drew.
Actually, even in the case of someone like Manchin, you saw that his coalition changed substantially from the last time he won.
For sure.
He actually gained, relative to the state, West Virginia, it's not a homogenous entity. He gained relative to the rest of the state in some of the urban areas, or, however urban they are in West Virginia. That's where he gained. And, he lost more in a lot of the rural areas. And I think, bringing it back to what's going on tonight, Beth Van Dyne in Texas 24 and Troy Nehls in Texas 22 are going to be a couple really interesting tests in November of ancestral loyalty, because they both have done really well locally. They've gotten a lot of crossover votes locally, but we got to see if that's going to transfer to crossover votes federally in November.
And talking about West Virginia,
sorry,
good.
I got to break. Oops. Sorry, I got to break in here real quick. Is that El Paso has now voted in Texas? It's voting heavily for MJ Hager. Honestly, Western Texas, just in general, is not showing a lot of strength for West at all. Right now, Hager is up, and outside of East Texas and a couple of scattering of counties
with like 5
Western
people.
Texas,
Yeah.
other like these counties have barely any Democrats at all. Like she's won the King County, 100% of precincts are in King County, and it's tied 3-3. Like that's the sort of margin we're looking at in West Texas. So basically,
But,
what I'm getting at is it doesn't look good for Royce West. He's done really well in East Texas, but he needs to do better in the West if he wants to stay competitive.
And looking at the 23rd district, we were talking about when this primary started, where will the Hispanic votes go because neither candidate is Hispanic. And the 23rd district is breaking heavily for Hager at this point. I mean, it only looks like one county right now, and that is
Culberson.
Basically only one county, Culberson County, and that's only narrowly going to West. Every other county in the district so far is going to Hager. So that's a big thing to watch. San Antonio and Austin going to Hager is a big thing to watch, and El Paso going to Hager is a good thing to watch. So even though minority communities in Houston and Dallas are breaking for West, and the scattered Democrats on the Arkansas-Louisiana border in East Texas are breaking for West, it's not enough to overcome what appears to be a strong Latino base for Hager and a strong performance in San Antonio, Austin, and El Paso.
Yeah, like in Hidalgo County, she's pulling 60% of the vote there. That's a heavily populated Hispanic county. Obviously, doesn't vote as much. Turnout is low in the Rio Grande Valley. In Cameron County, which is actually more competitive than most of the Rio Grande Valley counties, she's winning 2-1. Webb County, she's winning almost 2-1, and then Maverick County, she's winning 57-42. These are good margins in that area.
And of course, Royce West has to be ahead in Kennedy County 17-13 because nobody lives there.
Also, just since the Texas House Texas 23rd was named, Raul Reyes is now leading Tony Gonzalez 52-48 in the Republican primary.
Yeah, and that's another place to watch if Trump's endorsement will be successful or not, because the majority of the party, except Ted Cruz, was backing Gonzalez for the seat. And interestingly enough, they're both veterans. I believe Gonzalez is a Navy veteran, and Raul Reyes is an Air Force veteran. So.
I wanted to mention the Loving County because if you've not seen the Twitter account, the Loving County Democratic Party, that's just why I had to mention them. It's the smallest county in the country in terms of population. It voted for, I think, Trump with around 95% of the vote. These are the type of areas you're dealing with in these West Texas areas, aside from places like Laredo, Amarillo, those sorts of areas. Actually, not Laredo. That would be
Laredo's south.
Yeah, no. What was I thinking of?
Lubbock.
Yeah, Lubbock and Odessa, Midland, those sorts of areas.
Yeah.
Those were populated counties, and I don't think most of those are in yet, if I'm looking at these numbers.
No, yeah, those are also some very heavily Hispanic counties. Actor in
Lubbock,
Midland.
Lubbock, Hager is up 58-42. Another one, like to pay attention to, Tom Green.
That's San Angelo, right?
Yeah, that's a big county. That's actually, I think it's around 30 to 40% Hispanic in terms of population. Very Republican. But yeah, I think we may have a call coming here shortly. So we're getting some good numbers out of Texas, basically.
Yeah, we're going to be having some more projections shortly in quite a few Texas races. We're just taking some time real quick to confer with our elections team. But it's certainly going to be interesting. I mean, looking at Texas tonight, that's obviously where the myriad competitive races are tonight, are in Texas. It's a very big state. The Tex exit created a lot of open races and seats that are safe for Republicans, and at the same time, you've got competitive primaries and seats that are looking like potential Democratic pickups in November. So, it's going to be interesting to look at.
Well, and also to speak to Texas Senate, just briefly while we're getting some more of those numbers. When the initial results came in, one thing for West, he's from the Dallas area, and he was not running up the margins that he needed to in a lot of suburban Dallas. I believe Eric pointed out that he wasn't even winning in Rockwall County, which is a smaller suburban county right on the border with Dallas. So obviously, if Hager continues to win, the heavily Hispanic areas, and it looks like she's getting big margins in the Austin area, which is a huge source of Democratic votes in the primary. I could definitely see this runoff starting to shift her way as we get further along in the night.
Mm-hmm. And I'm actually going to pull up that Texas map just to kind of give you guys a visual look at Texas. Let me go ahead and screen share right here. The divide is pretty clear, and I'll explain it as I kind of show it right here. So let me actually zoom out a little bit here so you can all see the whole map at once. So what I was talking about, where you can kind of see where West is doing the best, no pun intended, is East Texas. He's doing really well. This is the Deep South. If you want to call the Deep South in Texas, this is what it is. Jefferson County, Harris County, heavily populated, Fort Bend, Dallas, Tarrant, doing very well in those areas. And those are areas where you had prominent Democrats who endorsed him. Sheila Jackson Lee. Those sorts of people like them who are respected within the caucus and within the black community in Texas. The problem is black voters aren't actually... Relatively speaking, they're not enough for you to win a statewide primary with because of the presence of white voters and Hispanic voters. So these counties that we're talking about right here, Hall County, Swisher, these are a few counties he's winning, but they have like 2 votes in. Like, this is 87% of the vote in, and he's got 2 votes in this county. Haskell County, there's only been 60 votes. Swisher, Lamb, these sorts of areas, even if he's winning these areas, it doesn't really matter that much. When you have Hager doing well in Travis County, Williamson, San Antonio area, El Paso, like that one county, Culberson, that he was winning in West Texas, is now apparently voting for Hager. So that's the fundamental problem that West has right now. He's doing very well. This is a very respectable performance for him, but he's got to do better. He's got to either crank up those urban margins in those counties he's doing well in, or he's got to win some of these outstanding counties left. Because land doesn't vote, but because this is a 50-50 race, despite the fact that the map doesn't look 50-50, but at the same time, these areas are heavily populated. There are metropolitan areas that he's struggling in.
Well, and we have a quick update.
Yeah. And this is courtesy of our friends at Decision Desk.
We have an announcement.
We have an important projection to make. In the state of Texas, we can project that Pete Sessions, who formerly represented Texas's 32nd district in the Dallas suburbs and was defeated last year, he will be successful in defeating Flores-endorsed real estate executive Renee Swan to win the GOP runoff in Texas's 17th congressional district there. That is an important win for him, and he will likely be returning to Congress from a new seat in January of next year because we rate this seat as safe in November, safe Republican. So Sessions has won, and his career seems to be continuing on a new path, but a good path for him to continue.
The tale of 2 Sessions tonight. One's career ends, the other's revived.
True.
Literally.
But no, I think for Pete Sessions, obviously, this is a huge victory for him personally. He's back in Congress. And obviously for the Republican Party, its woman push has suffered another big blow, as this was another race they were trying to put women and a woman in a safe seat. And obviously they failed in that regard with Sessions carpetbagging into this seat.
It seems like the Republicans, as of late, have only succeeded in putting women in Congress in primaries where they did not want them to win, like Lauren Boebert, for example, was an example.
Yes.
Marjorie Greene.
Yes.
Didn't the Democrats consider trying to get Chet Edwards to run again in his seat? I mean, he'd obviously lose, but I remember the idea of being
Obama VP candidate Chet Edwards.
He was actually.
He was
a VP. Yeah.
He was considered for VP, and then he just lost in a landslide in 2010, 63 to 38, basically.
I mean, that was the Waco seat, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There was a massive swing between 2008 and 2010 there.
I mean, Edwards still barely won in 2008. Like, the writing was on the wall.
I mean, it wasn't really barely. It was like 52-45, but it was closer than expected.
Yeah. Just a general broad note,
Well-
Republicans have been pretty successful at putting women candidates in races that are competitive, which is, I guess, better than nothing. The problem is they're competitive races. So, like, obviously, Nancy Mace, if she wins, that's fantastic for Republicans, but she might not win.
Right.
You'd rather have the candidates in a Texas 13 or a rural seat where they'll be there forever.
Colorado 3, theoretically.
Well, a good thing on this was Noah Rodnick, just to quickly give off to Kratz. Noah Rodnick had a great thing on this with talking about Elsie Stefanik's PAC. That they've really not been successful in getting Republican women in safe seats, but have gotten it in either seats that are not competitive or maybe are a little too competitive for comfort in this sense. So just bringing that theory up there, which is a very good one brought up by Noah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, and again, to speak to this broader trend we've seen with the GOP, pushing for more female candidates, more women in Congress. One of the issues that I think they're running into, and I think the second primary, Victor Dan actually illustrates this quite well, is, adding diversity to a party takes time, and it takes electing local officials, electing state level officials, and then Congress and then statewide offices. And, with Sessions' race tonight, he's running against a real estate executive. And again, with the Nels Walz race, Walz is essentially just a wealthy businesswoman. And it speaks to the broader problem of, in many of these cases, these situations where, a female Republican could, pull out the win, could, end up in Congress. It seems that sometimes the GOP is trying to do it without, a local base, or they are rallying behind a candidate that maybe doesn't have as much political experience. So it'll be interesting to see if the GOP keeps up this push, long term, because I think long term it could definitely be successful.
Projection.
All right, we have a new projection, and that is in Alabama 2, where Club for Growth endorsed candidate Barry Moore will defeat Jeff Coleman, who was the businessman that was endorsed by Congresswoman Martha Roby to hold the seat. So this, along with Texas 17, are two examples of incumbent-backed candidates losing to challengers. Barry Moore will defeat Jeff Coleman. So that is another successful Club for Growth pickup. And unlike Georgia's 7, where McCormick is in a toss-up race, this is a safe Republican seat that hasn't been competitive since 2010 when Bobby Bright lost re-election to Martha Roby.
Yep. It's worth noting Roby isn't exactly the definition of a strong incumbent. She had some struggles. She wasn't particularly well liked by Trump and Trump-skeptical Republicans. So it's not surprising that her endorsement might not have carried as much weight in the district as some other incumbents. She wasn't even there for a long time to begin with. She won in 2010 of all races. So,
right, she's definitely the least Trumpy of all the Alabama delegation.
I'll say this to what you were saying about how it takes time to build up women candidates. Emily's List started in the mid '80s, and their first success was Barbara Mikulski, and they basically went all in on that race, and it ended up her taking the Senate seat. It took 3 decades, but now they have basically candidates running in every race from Senate to city council, and they give money and endorsements that actually move votes. So it takes time and effort to actually do it, but you'll start seeing results eventually. You just have to pick and choose your battles early on.
Yeah, and that's why I also mentioned that I think it's going to be interesting to see, how the GOP sticks with this effort going forward, because their failures to, increase the number of women nominated in safe seats, the number of women, in their party's caucus in Congress, has generated a lot of publicity, and in fact, a lot of negative publicity, obviously, understandably. And if I'm just interested to see if this effort continues in earnest past, this year, past 2020, into the future, like Emily's List did. If it does, I think it could be very successful, but I don't know if it will.
Yeah, and just speaking on Kratz's point, examples Alabama too. Jessica Taylor was the whole publicity stunt about the conservative squad that was going to take on the Democratic squad. She didn't even get into the runoff. I mean, the others on that thing may do, but it's still, quite the irony with this big push that even its biggest pushers are not getting through.
I will say that Republicans do have their own version of Emily's list. It's called the Susan B. Anthony list, and it has basically never been successful.
Right. That's the organization Marilyn Musgrave chairs, right?
I believe so.
Yes. I would believe so as well.
I believe we should probably mention someone was wanting to mention Maine too. That's one that we mentioned earlier, but we started to see some results come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the main thing about Maine second, and we've mentioned the ranked choice voting here in Maine, is that if none of these candidates get over 50% of the vote, then we will see this go to ranked choice voting. But right now, from these very, very early, likely no mail-in ballot counted results in these very, very small towns, Dale Crafts is very, very close to that 50% marker. He's at 48.2% right now, with apparently 7% in. So this is something that we should be watching this whole night, and I think a lot of people should be watching because this is going to be something that's going to be close in my opinion. When it comes down to what we've got, if Crafts can get over 50%, then that kind of puts him in a very solid position going against Jared Golden into November, I think. That puts him in a more solid position than I think a lot of us would have thought going into the night. And it's going to be interesting to see how this race turns out. Also more interesting, Eric Brackey is in third right now. He is behind who was the GOP Senate nominee in 2018 against Angus King. Did okay. He did a little bit better than people expected him on that night. But he is in third place right now, not only behind Dale Crafts, but also Adrian Bennett. He's kind of also taken up that anti-establishment lane that Brakey usually takes up. But it's definitely been a disappointing night for Brakey, who was going to try and continue to grow his star in Maine, and it's burned out and failed tonight.
This is probably not.
Go ahead real quick, because then I want to talk about the
this is probably more indicative of why Brakey isn't doing so well, but I remember a photo from about a month ago of him holding a flamethrower, and he wasn't holding it correctly, which in a district like Maine second with a lot of hunting and firearm owners probably did damage him among conservatives.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he's very much a libertarian Ron Paul
it gives me Andrew
which is
Riggleman
not a
vibes.
perfect fit in Maine, of all places.
Right.
Yeah. So now that we've talked a little bit about Maine, I wanted to pivot back to Texas again to just do a results update on these House runoffs and the Senate race. So as we talked about in the Senate race, it's only looking better for Hager as the night goes on. It's still too close to call right now, but Hager is certainly the favorite because there are more votes out for Hager than there are for West at the moment. And as Eric pointed out, you can't win a primary solely on black turnout. Not in Texas, at least. It's not like the state of Alabama or Mississippi, where a majority of the Democratic electorate is black. Here you've got a strong Hispanic contingent, and more white suburban women voters are actually now registering as Democrats in Texas as well. And that plays another critical role in the electorate. And in the House races, just to briefly touch on some things, Raul Reyes is still leading 53-47 over Tony Gonzalez. And in the primary for the 24th district, Kim Olson is losing 55-45 to Candace Valenzuela. We could see a projection there soon, in the next half hour or so. It's very possible that we could see Elections Daily calling it for Valenzuela. Right now, Olson's down 57-43 in Dallas County, 64-36 in Denton County, and Olson's only narrowly winning in Tarrant County, where she has a small lead. But most of the vote is cast in Dallas County. And with Valenzuela leading by such a large margin, that's not good for Kim Olson there.
In Texas down ballot news, I have some updates. Right now, Lucio is winning his primary by 6% with most of the votes in. He'll probably hold on narrowly, which is something that progressives in Texas are not going to be happy about. And in other races, in House District 2, incumbent Dan Flynn is losing to Brian Slayton. Now, Brian Slayton is primarying Flynn from the right because of various apostasy from abortion to taxes to infrastructure spending. But notably, he has attacked Governor Abbott and criticized him for being a weak leader that is, for lack of better words, criticizing him for being a weak leader and being in a wheelchair.
Yikes. Real quick, we have some more Texas updates. In the 10th district, Mike Siegel is still holding a 10% lead over challenger Pritesh Gandhi. So it's very possible that Siegel, a progressive, and Valenzuela, a progressive, both of whom have similar 10-point leads over their opponents. It's possible to see projections out of both those districts soon. One district, however, where we cannot expect a projection soon is Texas House District 13, the seat of Mac Thornberry, which is the most conservative House seat in the country. The most Republican on paper. Ronnie Jackson is only up 52.8 to 47.2. So that race is tightening. Weingarter's been endorsed by Thornberry. Jackson's been endorsed by President Trump. It's going to be interesting to watch how that race goes there. But that is the king of tantamount to the election there. Whoever wins that primary tonight will almost certainly be the next congressperson from that district. So.
And for interested. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, well, that's interesting because, Ronnie Jackson has very close ties to the president. And the fact that he's only winning barely, I mean, we talked about at the beginning of the broadcast, kind of the declining value of the Trump endorsement. And I think that the fact that Ronnie Jackson is only winning very narrowly in a very conservative district, I don't think it shows that Trump's standing has weakened. I think it's more shown that voters in the Republican Party have, more so than they used to, caught up to the fact that there is very little inter-party resistance to Donald Trump anymore. The vast majority of Republicans support his agenda. They will vote with him most of the time. And I think, at the beginning of his presidency, there was still, an attitude that a lot of establishment Republicans were against him, were looking to undermine him. I think that has faded. And so I think voters care a little bit less now about, who's the Trumpiest. I think in their view, a lot of the candidates are very similar.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And one quick mention from Alabama that for any of those interested in football is the split between Lee County and Tuscaloosa County. So Lee County is where Auburn is from. And Tommy Tuberville is pulling an impressive 74% of the vote in that county. I wonder why. Meanwhile, in Tuscaloosa County, Jeff Sessions is polling 61%. You would not have expected this going in, given how friendly those two universities are towards each other. They're best friends. Everyone knows this.
The easiest way to get your tires slashed in Alabama is probably getting the wrong side of the Auburn-Alabama debate.
Right. I'm just waiting for the Nick Saban ad supporting Doug Jones. I mean, he's already cut an ad for his college friend Joe Manchin.
Right.
I mean, I will say this: if there was one thing that could swing a few votes in Alabama, it's a Nick Saban endorsement. I feel that's only a few, but that's a genuine wild card right there to some degree. That's what you would want if you're Doug Jones.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, I just have a quick update in the 23rd district. Reyes is ahead. Bayhawk County is a critical county. And Gonzalez is up 58-42 there. It's cast the majority of the votes. And at the moment, Reyes is beating Gonzalez in a lot of the more rural, sparsely populated counties in the district. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the person who performs best in the San Antonio suburbs that ends up winning this primary. And just like the 13th, this is the Republican contest that could come down to the wire.
Yeah, and that's going to be a fascinating race in November as well. We obviously have it at likely D, as far as I'm aware. But, again, it's a sprawling, spread out district with a lot of moving parts, similar to like in Arizona's first district, or a state like Alaska. And, it's going to be two veterans going up against each other in the fall. Texas 23rd didn't move. Left districts did in that 2018 Senate race. And we also know that Biden has, done worse in polls with Hispanic voters than Hillary Clinton did. And so obviously, Gina Ortiz-Jones has the name recognition advantage. She has the fundraising advantage. She has that massive party backing But I do think that this is going to be one, worth keeping an eye on as we get down the stretch, especially if Biden's polling with Hispanic voters continues to be weak.
Mm-hmm.
So I left for like a half hour after the results came in, and the second I got back, I saw Sessions won. I thought, really, Jeff Sessions pulled off an upset here. All right, should have known.
No, that's a different Sessions.
Yep, should have known better.
Yeah, the rise of one, the fall of another.
Yeah, they all look the same.
They do all look the same. To make an update on Maine's 2nd Congressional District, like I mentioned earlier, that 50% boundary, Dale Crafts has slowly but surely has started to kind of fall away from that. He is now down to 46.5%. Once again, it is still Adrian Bennett in second place over Eric Brakey. As it looks more and more likely that we will go to ranked choice voting here, it's going to be really interesting to see how where the Bennett and Brakey voters go for their second choice, because I expect Crafts to pull out in the head here, but it's going to be really interesting to see where the Brakey Bennett voters go for their second choice here, as it looks more and more like we are going to head to a ranked choice voting here.
I'm honestly surprised that Maine 2nd hasn't gotten more attention. I mean, it is a heavily white, low levels of college education, very rural district, and obviously Jared Golden pulled out the win. He's a impressive candidate. He's been a good, it seems like he's a strong incumbent. But at the same time, if we get to election night and even if Trump is losing, but he's holding up better in a lot of rural, white, socially conservative areas than maybe the polls indicate. I mean, this is the kind of district where you would look to see if there's a surprise happening. I mean, remember back in 2016, in Minnesota's 8th district and Minnesota's 1st district, both districts that, every analyst basically thought were safe for Democrats. They were white, socially conservative, very rural. And when Trump started doing better in those kinds of places on election night, both those incumbents were almost unseated. And so I think for sure that Maine 2nd, it hasn't gotten a lot of attention now, but if by 8:30 p.m. on election night, Trump's doing better in those types of areas than we expect, that's going to be a place you're going to want to look.
But I mean, I'd also expect Jared Golden to outrun Trump there, or not Trump, Biden.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I mean,
yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, if Maine 2 reverts to form, then I doubt Maine 2 is going to keep going, the way of Minnesota 7 and just keep getting redder and redder and redder, especially in this election cycle, simply because Joe Biden is a better fit for that type of electorate than Hillary Clinton was. But it is conceivable down the line in the future, though, if Maine 2 votes 15, 20, 25 points to the right of the state, that it is something that could, prove fatal to a Democratic chance.
Yeah. And it's worth noting, Maine is the whitest state in the country. It's the 2nd Congressional District is 94% white. It's over 2/3 rural. This is prime zero of Trump country, a place that went from very much an Obama county in 2012 to one that Trump won by, I believe, double-digit margins.
Yeah, he won it by 13, the northern Maine.
Yeah, it's the base of Republican strength in Maine, and if obviously Republicans would love to win that seat back, especially to have someone there for redistricting. If I don't know how they redistrict in Maine, but obviously the lines could change. Although traditionally New Hampshire and Maine lines have stayed pretty consistent over the years. In terms of what they look like, what areas are represented.
Mm-hmm. Also, just that if this is to entertain anyone, the Republican Senate, the NRSC, since Gooden has one, has already put out an attack ad on Twitter about Sarah Giddens, if that's to anyone's delight of wanting to know about that already.
NYC has also called it for Gideon.
Gideon, yeah.
Yeah.
We are officially in a Gideon versus Collins race.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like Sweet is really having any sort of real base of strength in the state at the moment. Oh, here we go.
Call.
All right, we have two projections to make in Democratic runoffs in Texas. First off, we can project that Mike Siegel will defeat physician Pritesh Gandhi to win the 10th district runoff. This is a rematch. He was the nominee in 2018. Right now, he has the lead in Harris County. We can project he will face Congressman McCall in November. The race is rated as lean Republican by Elections Daily, but a toss-up rating is possible by November. Our second projection is in Texas 24, where progressive Candace Valenzuela, an Afro-Latina woman, will defeat Kim Olson. She's a diverse candidate with a diverse progressive base, the endorsement of 4 prominent senators, and this is another race that's lean Republican with Beth Van Dyne that we could easily see that moving this race to a toss-up here as well. That is another victory for 2 progressive victories in runoffs tonight in Texas.
Mm-hmm. And this is a district that Trump narrowly won. He won it 51-45 after Romney won it by 22 percentage points. Beto O'Rourke actually won the district, although Greg Abbott won it by a 10-point margin. So obviously, in Greg Abbott, the candidate that Greg Abbott faced was far more similar ideologically to Candace Valenzuela in terms of being on the progressive wing of the party. So that could be an impact there, but. If Trump is losing this district, ultimately Republicans will have to outrun him, and if there's any indication of some of these down ballot races went in 2018, that's possible, but obviously that's not a situation you want to be in if you're a Republican in Texas, given how much of the district is in Denton County, urban, Dallas, and Tarrant. It's just it's a district that's rapidly shifting the other way.
This is the type of seat. I mean, McCall could easily hold it, no doubt, but it's a type of seat that if the election continues to go worse for Republicans nationally and in the state of Texas, that it could be very much in trouble, regardless of how much McCall may outrun Trump at whatever rate that may be.
Yeah, and it's also worth remembering. I think something that's often underestimated is just the value of experience. I mean, in the Texas GOP, you have a lot of politicians, a lot of party operatives, but they've never had to run a close race. And I think in a lot of ways it showed in 2018. They were able to hold on, in many cases, very narrowly. But, in a situation like this where they go from essentially coasting with no effort to, having to outrun the top of the ticket. I mean, certainly there are politicians that can do that. Van Dyne has had crossover support in her local races, so has Nels. But that's a really hard thing to suddenly have to do when you never had to do it. So
it's so rapid too, as well. I mean, 2016 they were coasting races, and 2 years later they were having to panic at the last minute with the Beto surge.
That's what Steve Russell had in Oklahoma's 5th district, which obviously Oklahoma is very similar to parts of Texas in certain ways. He had never had to run a competitive race before, and then all of a sudden, Kendra Horn comes in, makes it competitive. Nobody thinks the race is competitive, so he just kind of sits there and does nothing. And then he has to scramble at the end to try and hold on to a seat that really he had no business losing to begin with.
And the interesting thing, too... Oh, yeah, sorry. Whoever was going, I'll let him go. Oh.
I can speak from my view of working in campaigns is that one thing that candidates hate doing is actually campaigning, whether it be fundraising, driving constantly from one end of the district to another, scheduling events, shaking people's hands. They all hate doing that. They'd much rather sit in an office, either looking over bills or doing nothing.
I mean, to be fair, who wouldn't like to be paid for doing nothing? You get pretty good money as a congressman.
Well, we could always bring up, Ted Cruz's famous campaign manager, Jeff Rowe, for doing nothing down the stretch.
Yeah, in Arizona,
Yeah.
Yeah, you have years of oppo against Kyrsten Sinema and decide to use exactly none of it. That was a bold strategy.
The only oppo you use is the stuff from 2003 that makes her look good.
Attacking her for not supporting the war in Iraq, which really isn't I mean, you could have done better.
Also, the pink tutu.
The pink tutu as well. That's a classic.
It takes a lot to make me like cinema, but they tried to do it. They made their best effort.
All right, guys.
We had a competitive primary.
Oh, we have a call.
We have an important projection and a victory for President Trump in Texas 13. We can project Ronnie Jackson will win the nomination. They're defeating Thornberry endorsed candidate Weingartner there. His lead jumped to 55-45, and Elections Daily has strong intelligence that the remaining votes out are only going to benefit Ronnie Jackson. So it looks like a once tight race has now started to move outward to the point where it's looking fairly good right now for Ronnie Jackson, the former White House physician who is now going to be the next congressman for Texas 13.
Mm-hmm. And he's a carpetbagger in the area. I know some Texas Republicans who aren't exactly pleased. I don't think he'll be the most effective representative. I know that's a little bit off topic, but that's actually a win because he did manage to move to that district. He's not a native from that area, so he basically moved to the most conservative district in the country to win a primary. All things
and there was a lot of
strategy.
Yeah.
Oh, it is, and I think a lot of criticism was towards him was he was running a national primary campaign, and the other candidate, Weinberger, I think, was running a local campaign, and I think a lot of people, obviously in the Texas GOP, weren't fond of Jackson turning this into a personal vendetta against Senate Democrats who rejected his VA nomination. And now, obviously, he'll be in Washington now and as a representative.
If there's any
and he's fairly young. He's fairly young, and unless he's primaried, he will be able to hold this seat for quite some time if he wants to. Although, given the fact that he doesn't have a political background, more of a medicinal background, I'm not quite sure how he'll like Washington. I mean, one good example is John Runyon represented the 3rd District in New Jersey. He was an Eagles football player. He only stayed for 2 terms before leaving after not really liking the job very much. So we don't know for sure yet if someone like Ronnie Jackson will be a successful legislator, or maybe he'll surprise us and end up being a true legislator.
I'm actually with Harrison on this one. You know, Ronnie Jackson, he's obviously very partisan. You know, understandably, he's run a campaign close side to the president. But I could see him, you know, heading out to the private sector in a few years, especially if, you know, Republicans stay in the House minority. The House minority is, you know, a difficult place to be. You have very little power. It's not like the Senate where you can filibuster and you have, you know, very powerful committees, much more, you know, majoritarian. And then on top of that, you know, with Texas becoming increasingly competitive statewide, I'm not really sure I see a immediate future for Jackson statewide, unless he moves maybe to a row office. I could definitely see that. But things like governor, senator, he's probably at the bottom of the pecking order. So I'm kind of with Harrison on this one. It's hard to see.
He doesn't have that well-developed, well-groomed political base that you would need. You know, a long tenure in the House or a strong position in the state legislature to be able to run for a Senate seat or a gubernatorial.
And this is actually pretty important because a lot of his work is going to have to be local. It's a large, sprawling district he will have to drive around if he wants. If he wants to be a truly effective legislature for that district, he is going to have to drive a large amount of time. And if he doesn't, he could face problems. For example, Tim Hulskamp in Kansas, he was bad for that district on farm issues. They were able to primary him in a very Republican district from the left for not supporting the farm bill.
That is certainly a problem for him. He could lose the primary. I'm not going to count him out. We'll see how effective he is. But certainly Congressman Thornberry right now is lamenting the loss of Weingartner and not looking at these because, I mean, I think it's fair to say that Weingartner, given the fact that his campaign was run locally and had the support of Republicans in the district, they were grooming him to be the next member of Congress there. He would have probably, I mean, we can't say it yet and we have to be objective, but I think Thornberry would probably believe that Weingartner would be a much more successful representative on local issues than Jackson, because Jackson dropped in from out of state from Washington. And, you know, a lot of these voters are not fond of Washington. They wanted to drain the swamp by voting for Trump, only to find that a Trump-endorsed candidate has taken the seat in the primary.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not to say he can't be effective, but this is just a practical issue. The farm bill and farm issues are very important in rural communities, and that is the sort of stuff that can cause a primary in the future.
And we don't want to count him out because we shouldn't ever judge someone before they've had a proven record. He's never been in elected political office, so for all we know, he could turn out to be a very successful legislator who could have a long tenure. We just don't know yet.
And even long-term elected officials some of them tend to bail from Congress early on, like Robert Hurt in Virginia. He got in, was relatively effective on local issues in Virginia, but he got to the House of Representatives. There weren't any earmarks, and he couldn't wheel and deal or do anything. He was just a party line vote, so he left.
Yeah, because he wasn't senior enough. I mean, he didn't have. Usually in the House, you can't really bring back beef for your district unless you're on a powerful committee where you're a chairman or a ranking member, or you're in charge of a prominent subcommittee. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have those connections, or you're relatively new to the House, and people in the House know that it takes close connections, it takes an impressive victory, or to climb the ranks over time, slowly rising up until you can be one of those powerful legislators who has strong influence on committees. I mean, arguably, committees are the beating heart of the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. That is where legislation starts before it gets to the floor. That's where beef is taken back to districts. That's where the debate occurs. I mean, if you're in charge of a committee or part of a committee, you wield a lot of power in Washington. And representatives realize this, and sometimes they leave office because they don't feel as influential. They run for Senate or governor, but Senate's arguably even harder because there are fewer seats than the House, 100 instead of 435, and so it's more exclusive as a chamber in general. It's harder to get into the upper echelon of leadership, and usually you see those top leaders have been in the Senate for a long time. Chuck Schumer's been in the Senate since 1999. Dick Durbin's been in the Senate since the 90s. And on the Republican side, John Thune's been there since 2005, and McConnell's been there since the 80s. I mean, the Senate, Washington's all about experience, so it's going to be very interesting to see if Jackson wants to play this long-term or short-term. And Thornberry was a prominent Republican. I mean, he was chairman and now ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. He's been a traditional conservative, but, more of an establishment party brand conservative that's held the seat since he defeated Bill Sarpelli as a Democrat in 1994.
I think it's something to note how much influence in the last 4 years Texas has lost from retirements.
Yes, for sure. And next exit this year knocks out even more prominent Republicans. Last cycle you lost people like Jeb Hensarling. This cycle you're losing Mike Conaway, Mike Thornberry, etc.
I think that all that's left is McCall.
They have the ranking. They also have the ranking member on appropriations. I can't remember her name off the top of my head right now.
Well, it's kind of an inverse of what's happening in New York. It's
Granger, Granger has.
Kay Granger.
It's kind of Granger's a big name in Tarrant County specifically, but this is kind of like an inverse of what's happened in New York, right? Where you've had a lot of Democrats that are on committees lose over the last few years. Texas has been retirements, or it's been people in competitive districts who have lost. In New York, it's those safer sort of areas. So you're kind of seeing some of these big committee seats open up for for the first time in a while for some of them. Apparently, good news sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you had Joe Crowley, the caucus chair, fourth-ranking Democrat in the leadership, and then now Elliot Engel, who was chair of the Foreign Relations Committee and had been in Congress since 1988. So you're right, for sure.
Yeah. I do want to explain one race we have real quick, is that we called the 17th for Pete Sessions. The race has narrowed a little bit in voting, but the crosstabs here aren't really concerning if you're Sessions. You'll notice here that the only two counties that Swan has won are Brazos, which is 58% in, and Burleson, which is 100% in. She's doing all right at the moment because of her Brazos numbers, but you'll notice there's a large portion of McLennan left in, as well as these other rural counties that are strongly supporting Sessions. This is the sort of reason why we're okay with we're standing by this rating, and why it was called so early by other news outlets as well, is that McLennan number right there is a large portion of that district and is a big reason why Pete Sessions is going to be the nominee from this district.
Yeah, one thing we factor into our election projections, particularly early projections, is the fact that the votes that haven't come in are often even more important than the votes that have come in, and that's something that's certainly playing in the Senate runoff for the Democrats. The counties that are outstanding are very favorable for Hagar, and that's why you've seen it go from a 50-50 race to now essentially a 53-47 Hagar lead, where we will likely see a projection soon there. Similar here in Sessions District in the 17th, where we've projected him a winner. Like Eric said, the bulk of the territory that is out right now is territory that's strong for him, and Swan's base in those two counties are mostly in. So, yes, it's important to look at that. Look at the fact that what is not reporting is often more important than what has reported, and expect Sessions' margin to only tick up from here.
And if I can also mention, Alabama's first congressional district, there's, of course, a GOP runoff here. It is extremely tight right now as we continue to get more votes in from Mobile as well, which is the biggest county in this district. But it is extremely tight right now. Jerry Carl, who I believe got the most votes in the original primary, by only a point over Bill Hightower, which comes out to about 400 votes right now. Again, still a lot of Mobile and Baldwin County left to go, which are both right now going for Carl, but it's very, very tight right now in this district, which is a very Republican district. There's not going to be any upset here, folks. With Democrats, don't even try and think about that. But this is basically a crowning for whoever will be the next representative from Alabama's first district. And right now, Carl has a very, very tight lead.
Yeah. I want to bring up real quick, in the end here, it's too close to call right now, but in another hour or so, I could see us calling it for Carl. Carl's from Mobile County. He's the commissioner there. And he actually won every other county except Baldwin County in the district. And I did the math on the first round of the primary, and about 50% of the electorate was in Mobile County, which is now being won by Carl by 10 points. So even if he loses Baldwin County, if he wins by at least 10 points in Mobile, or possibly even better for him, if he can expand that margin there once all the votes are cast, then that plus counties outside the district should be enough to give Carl a narrow victory over Hightower. So, a lot of people thought Hightower would win, and it's still very possible, but I still firmly believe that Jerry Carl can pull this out because of, I hate to bring up the meme, but crucial Mobile County in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to update on two things, other things that are other districts that we've talked about before. In the Alabama Senate race, Jeff Sessions has endorsed Tommy Tuberville in his concession speech. There was some concern that he had not pledged to do that before the primary. He has done so in the concession speech. The other is that in the 22nd Congressional District, which we called for Troy Nehls earlier, he is utterly dominating Kathleen Wall, 71-28 at the moment. She has spent over $13 million trying to get into Congress in the last two cycles, and has not gotten close in this case. She spent, I believe, $7 million, according to Dave Wasserman on Twitter.
That's another example of carpetbagging done unsuccessfully.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you wonder where all that money is going, because it's obviously not going to anywhere effective.
So, she is a GOP donor. So,
you've seen her before, right? I do want to mention just one thing is that there was this race in North Carolina 9. They wanted to figure out who the nominee was going to be for the race there, and for some reason, there's this realtor candidate who was endorsed by the realtors who was trying to get votes. She ran television ads 24/7, and she spent millions of dollars on this race and got like 5% of the vote. But she was endorsed by the realtors. She was a big GOP donor, so that's the reason why her campaign was taken seriously and why she had some money, is that she had donated to us. So we'll kind of lend her credibility, even if she's not going to win.
I think people expected Kathleen Wall to lose at this point. It was pretty widely expected, but I don't think this big of a margin for Troy Nehls was expected. He's over 70%. That's easily the most lopsided margin in what was considered a competitive primary tonight. And that's not good news for Kathleen Wall, and it certainly is going to discourage her from running for Congress again. I would think. There's a possibility that she just keeps burning her money like someone in Connecticut, like Linda McMahon, who spent $50 million and then lost by 12 points. So,
look, clearly she needed to move to Texas 13. That's what she needed to do. Just whenever the
maybe she can primary Congressman Jackson next cycle. That's obviously not going to happen. But, and obviously the 22nd is not at all like the 13th. It's a toss-up district. It's not like the 13th where the Republican nominee is a shoo-in. In this district, in the 22nd, Garney stands a very good chance of actually flipping the district. It is a very diverse district trending towards the Democrats. So it's not like Troy Nehls is a shoo-in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Troy Nehls arguably beat the better general election candidate in Pierce Bush in a bit of a surprise during the first round of it. I think most Republicans thought that Pierce Bush would nag into a runoff with him, and he beat him rather handedly. So Wells has been rather intriguing further in the election side of it. But yeah, the seat is changing. It's not the same seat that Tom DeLay once held. And Democrats have the advantage of a good cycle, again, possibly being allowing it to flip.
Yeah, real quick, actually, I made a map of the 22nd a few days ago just to show how the trends are going for Democrats there. So I'll briefly pull that up. But arguably the 22nd is one of the most prominent Democratic targets in this race, along with or in this election cycle. You know, the 24th is another one, the 10th is another one, the 23rd is the most obvious, but that one's generally accepted to be going the way of the Democrats this cycle for sure. And if Gonzalez loses, then that only solidifies that. But yes.
Yeah, and another, I think, interesting Texas race, I think we haven't really discussed now with the call of it, is the Texas 24th. Olson is lost. I know a lot of Democrats had been concerned about Olson's recent erratic behavior within the primary. So I think, obviously, Villanueva is a little more to the left of Olson, but she might do very better in the general, just because she might not have the baggage that Olson might carry around with her against a good Republican opponent, obviously, coming up.
Oops. Yep. Harrison will be back in a second. He just had a minor computer issue, but we'll continue going on through these sorts of races as they come through.
I will say that Kim Olson wasn't liked by the local Democratic establishment in the 24th, mainly because she carpetbagged to the area. She's originally from the 31st, which is strange that she ran in 24th because the 31st was open.
Yeah, it didn't make sense. I mean, she did rather well against a very weak Republican incumbent, Kenny Merchant, but since that, and then she's had more of, as you said, issues with the local Democratic Party for many different reasons. A lot being her own attitude towards the times, and very recently making comments that were seen as supporting the rioting after the George Floyd killing, which concerned certain Democrats about, because it could be seen as putting the seat in danger of not being able to flip it.
But we also have to remember she's kind of a driftwood primary candidate. In 2018, she was like the 13th person on the ballot. No one knew who she was, who happened to come within 4 or 5% of winning an election. And by doing that, that gave her some credibility that she's using to run for House. She probably wasn't a good candidate to begin with, and this is showing when she hits prime time.
Oh, yeah.
Just to go through an update.
Absolutely.
On,
the gaffes.
Go ahead.
No. Continue, Joe.
Yeah, so in Maine 2nd, at this point, folks, it is looking more and more likely that we will go to ranked choice voting in the 2nd Congressional District in the GOP primary. I'm not willing to call that just yet, but it is beginning to look more and more like Dale Crafts, who is in the lead right now, will not get over 50% here in the apparent first round of voting. So it does, and that took about a week and a day to do ranked choice voting in Maine last time.
Expect lawsuits.
Yeah, mixed with lawsuits, but so with that, it does look like we're going to be headed to a ranked choice voting decision. So we are not going to know who is going up against Jared Golden tonight in Maine 2nd District on the GOP side. It does not look like we are going to know who will be facing off there.
And I do want to bring up Alabama again, just because I find this fascinating. And I may have misjudged Tuscaloosa. Is that actually Tuscaloosa has now flipped to Tommy Tuberville. It's now voting for him 54 to 40, 53.3 to 46.6. So pretty impressive for Tommy Tuberville to do so well there. On the other hand, Jeff Sessions is indeed winning Mobile County. He's pulling around 58% of the vote there. And he's winning Madison County as well, which is Huntsville, another area that's more working class, that would be more favorable to him. He's pulling about 57% of the vote there. The rest of the state, though, is very yellow. For if you look at the Decision Desk results on our website, again, thank you to Decision Desk for letting us, for offering that to us. They're great. Go look at their website for some of these other results we're talking about. Most of our results are coming from their website. But if you look at it right now, there's like Madison County is red, which is for Jeff Sessions, and Mobile County is red, and those are the only two that are voting for Jeff Sessions at the moment, out of the entire state. So, although some black belt counties are left to come in, and Jeff Sessions did perform fairly well in the black belt in his primary. These would be areas like Lowndes County, Dallas, Perry, Greene, Sumter, some of these areas that have pretty low turnout at this point for Republicans. There we go. Harrison should be back here in a second.
The problem with the black belt in Republican primaries is the vast majority of them are registered Democrats, so they don't show up to vote in Republican primaries.
Yeah. Obviously, you have exceptions, like for
Sorry
example,
about that, guys. I'm back now.
Yeah, we were good. We carried it on for you. But they can make a difference occasionally, right? Like we saw in Mississippi, which has a different voting standard, of course, where infamously black voters carried longtime Senator Thad Cochran across the finish line against Chris McDaniel, an incendiary candidate who had some questionable ties to some groups and some comments that really made black voters want to make sure he did not become senator. There can be interesting instances like that, but here in Alabama, it's not going to make too much of a difference. Although sometimes Republican voters in these areas tend to vote for more reactionary candidates like Jeff Sessions would be doing. Since you weren't here, Harrison, I was going to mention to you, so you'll probably find this interesting, is that Tuscaloosa has now flipped and has voted for Tuberville. He is now winning.
Wow, that is truly something. That shows you just how unpopular Jeff Sessions has become.
Yeah, he's only winning Madison County, which is home of Huntsville, and Mobile County, where he's from, or where he's originally from. He's winning those two with 57 to 58% of the vote. The rest of the state has voted for Tuberville, and it's not especially close at the moment for a lot of these counties. Like Jefferson, which is Birmingham, Tuberville has a 12-point lead, 13-point lead, and then Montgomery, he has a 14, 15-point lead. But obviously flipping Tuscaloosa is a big moral victory for Tuberville. Kind of gets rid of some of the stigma that he was just running as the football candidate.
I will say with the Huntsville area, that's probably due to Sessions during his tenure in the Senate giving a ton of defense contracts from his time on the Armed Services Committee and on the Budget Committee. Like if your job is reliant on a contract that Sessions gave you during his tenure, you're going to have something for him.
Yeah. It also, it is traditionally, it's a very white working class area. The representative there, Mo Brooks, is very much a populist Freedom Caucus member who's adopted similar stances to Jeff Sessions on a lot of the issues. It's also one of the more ancestrally Democratic parts of the state. It had a Democratic representative, if I recall right, as recently as 2010 or 2009 when Parker Griffith was the representative there, if I recall right, before he defected to the Republican Party and then lost his primary.
Yes, Parker Griffith.
Yeah. And then switched back to run for governor.
He could run for governor and lose that race, yeah.
You can switch parties once. You don't get to switch back.
Well, you're going to lose.
There's a famous Winston Churchill quote about why no one trusted him, and it's because he switched parties twice.
Mm-hmm. He went from a conservative to a liberal and then back to the conservative, right?
Yes, he went from a Tory, then a liberal, then back. Yes.
Granted, he joined the Conservative Party a second time because the Liberal Party died.
Well, it still existed. It just wasn't a major player
the argument was that he jumped on opportunism to the Tories again.
Not to get too sidetracked, but the Liberal Party still exists in the form of the Liberal Democrats. It just hasn't been a major player for a majority, since like the 20s.
The 20s.
But we're talking about going from winning like 370 seats to winning 8. Like.
So if we want to talk about Texas here a little bit, MJ Hagar, as we're, I believe, 56% reporting in right now, according to NYT, Hagar has about a 35,000 vote lead, which translates to about a 52-48% lead over Royce West right now. This is a tight race, and I don't know, it might leave Democrats disappointed because neither candidate, whoever, if Royce West can somehow make a miracle happen and pull this out, or MJ Hagar is going to be kept at this very limited margin. Neither of these two candidates are really going to go into the general with a whole lot of momentum, honestly.
This race seems very familiar to the Kentucky Senate race, where a white moderate woman wins on the back of all the non-city areas of the state.
It does seem like that a little bit, doesn't it? But maybe not as much progressive love towards Royce West as there was towards Charles Booker, quite honestly.
Quick update in Maine, too. Dale Crafts is still ahead. He has a pretty commanding lead right now in Maine's 2nd District. In fact, Eric Brakey, who is viewed as the front runner, is in 3rd place right now. So that could definitely shake up the race here.
Well, there was some recent polling that indicated he was in a precarious position besides his name ID. That was the one reason people thought he would be ahead. But it seems like the flamethrower ad didn't quite do exactly what he wanted it to do.
So in more down ballot Texas news, in Travis County, the county that contains Austin, progressives have flipped the DA's office with candidate Jose Garcia knocking off Margaret Moore 68% to 32%. This is a big progressive flip. They now have a progressive prosecutor on criminal justice issue and on state legislative corruption. And a notable thing is, like Krasner in Philadelphia, Jose was backed by George Soros's DA PAC, which probably led to some of his organization.
Real quick, also in Texas's 23rd district, Raul Reyes is still in the lead right now by a 53-47 margin. And it's possible that with San Antonio suburbs continuously beginning to report new votes that we could see a Reyes win over Gonzalez, which would be that would be quite surprising considering Gonzalez was the favorite in the primary. But then again, there is no polling to suggest which way the primary leans, so either outcome is not particularly surprising. It would also be Trump's been fairly successful tonight with endorsements like Jeff Sessions, Ronnie Jackson.
And just to Oscar Love, just because he did ask, yes, it is a real flag.
Jeff Sessions, Pete, not Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions
just answer
lost. Yeah.
No. That's what I meant. He's been successful with Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, who he endorsed, and also successful with Ronnie Jackson. But if Gonzalez loses, and Gonzalez has the support of his campaign, actually the Trump campaign attacked Reyes for a campaign mailer that came out a few days ago that they called deceptive. But Reyes is supported by Ted Cruz, so it's going to be interesting to see who the voters in 23 end up sending to to be the Republican nominee in November against Gina Ortiz-Jones in a race where they would be the underdog.
Ugh.
Since we've talked a lot about the Texas Democratic primary, Senate primary, I'm sure we're not. Well, that was something. Well, I didn't realize someone's hammer, I think, was going off, but
I think that sounded like an egg timer or
but
something.
No. Yeah, so, I don't know. Maybe someone's cooking eggs and they're trying to enjoy the night. So the question was, I was saying before the egg thing was coming through was since we've talked a lot about the Senate Democratic primary for the Senate, we can shift maybe to the general and talk about the overall Senate race between either Cornyn, whoever, it's either Hager or West, and discuss the possible matchups. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or not.
Did you guys hear me at all?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like during the last 1 minute where my computer was having it like completely broken. Hello?
Is that the one that was making like the big noise
Hello?
sound?
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Yes. We can hear you. Yes,
we can hear you.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
No, I see Adam's trying to take New York's famous modern line.
What?
Not to make the joke. No.
I can't believe
Nothing. I was using that line in a historic context.
I can't believe we got retweeted by Josh Hawley.
Yeah, I think that's who broke the stream.
That's some bad juju.
No,
well, we actually got retweeted by Josh.
Yeah.
Oh.
We actually got retweeted by Josh. That's why I had to get out, because I was legitimately rolling on the floor. I'm not going to say why I was laughing on the floor and laughing very hard.
This is just
it's a very ironic thing.
Well,
let me just
I feel accomplished that my graphic has been retweeted by a U.S. senator.
Mm-hmm.
Hooray.
Yeah. Hey, that's just, we're getting some good views, and I'll take it.
Well, Eric, your favorite.
I don't want to get you. No, I don't want to.
Your favorite senator has retweeted your site.
Yeah. Hey, I'll take it. We're putting out good content.
No. I'm just trying to make a bit of a light joke. I'm just trying to take a light-hearted joke.
Yeah.
Let's make
back
to the basics.
We're going to get back on track here because we have some more results coming in. And if we have any more surprise moments like that, my computer may crash again. So let's just,
I think
what do you guys think about Raul Reyes in the 23rd?
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I wouldn't call that an upset necessarily. Mainly because, we have to remember that Ted Cruz endorsed Reyes. Ted Cruz did not side with the president on this race. Ted Cruz endorsed Raul Reyes for this race. And I think that's something that's very important to realize, is that it's not like the whole entire Texas establishment was behind Gonzalez here. There was some considerable state level support for Reyes. So I don't think we can call it an upset necessarily, but it's just been certainly a tight race, and it's certainly maybe a slight rebuke of the president in this district.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Watch Trump retweet Elections Daily next.
That would break the stream. That would definitely break.
that would.
Yeah.
We'd our follower count would just explode.
So many bots.
Hey, we'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, hey, we're putting, and the live streams for everyone. The live streams for everyone enjoy. Right or left, we have people all over the political spectrum, from democratic socialists to really libertarian sort of people. So yeah, we're happy to anyone to be here.
Yeah. Right, left, human, AI, doesn't matter. It's all the same.
Yep.
We support everyone from the Bernie Bros all the way to the right wingers who have other fun stuff. But yes, we're a very open chat. Oh dear.
I hate on down ballot elections how the last amount of the vote takes so long to count.
Yeah, it's quite annoying.
It always takes longer as we get into the weeds and we get away from the early vote, but certainly definitely a tight race, maybe a little bit tighter than people maybe would have expected, but certainly it's favoring one candidate over another right now as we get slowly more and more of these results. Certainly they're favoring more one candidate than the other in most of these races for sure.
Well, as you guys would probably expect, my computer is frozen again. So if you can hear me, if I mysteriously disappear from the stream, I will be back.
No problem.
Yep.
Sorry, we're trying to work on some stuff behind the scenes, and we're getting some endorsements. We're getting some election teams kind of discussing some of these incoming races to see what the numbers are, how close we are on some of these races, because there are some races that are going to be ready to be called in the next little bit of time. So.
So yeah, not much really left to call right now. I think we've called more than I think we were probably expecting to. Coming in tonight, results have been from Texas, especially. We did not know what results from Texas would look like, and they have done a pretty decent job of coming in tonight, which is not always something that we see from big. We have not seen really from big states like Texas in this election cycle, but certainly Texas has done a good job so far of counting at least a decent amount of the ballots they have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one thing I did want to mention, since we are starting to get in some results from Maine, I discussed where Elizabeth Sweet might possibly perform the best, which would be the Portland sort of area. But Sarah Gideon's actually doing very well in downstate. She's doing the worst in in some of the northern counties, some of the coastal ones up the coast, particularly in Washington. She's she's pulling around 71% in some of these, but in places like Cumberland, she's pulling 69%. Respectable numbers. It doesn't seem like there's a concentrated Elizabeth Sweet vote of Bernie supporters anywhere. Right.
If I had to guess a place where Gideon would do the worst, it would probably be in Waterville, Orono, and then the Francophone areas near the Canadian border.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in places like Aroostook County, which is the very northern part of Maine, Sarah Gideon is polling at 76% there right now, which is pretty crazy. But even those tiny areas getting 70 plus percentage points at all usually means you're having a pretty good night. So for her to get that means that the Democrats are very clearly behind Sarah Gideon in Maine at all levels, which I think is something that some Democrats were worried about, whether or not those progressives will get behind Gideon. Obviously, they have, and that's definitely been a big night for them.
Mm-hmm. And for those who aren't familiar with Maine, Joe mentioned there are francophone areas up near Maine. Those you might not realize is that outside of Louisiana, New England is the region with the most native French speakers. People actually grow up and speak French. Specifically Vermont and Maine.
Paul LePage, actually, his first language was French.
Yeah, there are communities up
and
there.
He was actually homeless. And he used to speak only French.
Yeah, there are communities up there that majority or along the Canadian border, which these obviously border the francophone areas of Canada, Quebec, those sorts of areas, and so you have people who grow up there speaking French, and that's their language. Some of the majority communities.
Another historical thing is when we refer to people as Cajuns, they're descended from Acadians, and the Acadian part of Canada is Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which is the part north of Maine.
Yeah,
that's where they're from.
Yeah. And there's it's definitely something to research. I won't draw too much on it, but it is an interesting split, and that's why a part of a reason why someone like a Paul LePage, who is francophone and grew up speaking French, has a genuinely interesting backstory that helped him win in 2010 and 2014 to some degree. But you can do pretty well up there if you're a French speaker.
Historically, the Democrats have been the francophone party, and the Republicans have been the English party.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when those roles switched is when Maine itself flipped from Democrat to Republican to Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's at this point it's just slow and steady right now, guys. That's what it is right now. It is just slow and steady as we wait for more of these numbers to come in. Obviously, mail-in ballots is still probably a thing. Very tight, but it's looking more and more like it's continuing to look good for right now for Jerry Carl in Alabama 01. He's got about a 52-48 lead right now, as with about 74% reporting, and Baldwin, which is right now going for Hightower, is almost in, while Mobile, which is Carl's home area and home county, is only apparently at 70% in right now. Monroe is at 40% and is only at 41%, and that's going for Hightower, but I don't know if that'll be enough to beat Mobile's current stand for Jerry Carl right now. So it does look like Jerry Carl will probably narrowly pull this out, though. We're going to wait here and make a legitimate call here right now on this race.
Yeah, it's what I was talking about earlier. I mean, being from Mobile, which counts most of the votes, which casts most of the votes, makes up most of the electorate, that's a big thing for Jerry Carl, and that's something that's going to come around. I mean, I've said it since my article earlier today. It's something that's going to end up being very beneficial to Carl, and in my opinion, it's going to end up allowing Carl to win this runoff. So that's certainly going to be very interesting. Looking at Carl's numbers right there, because right now he's up by a competitive margin, but obviously he's continuing to increase his Mobile margin, and Hightower isn't doing very well in Baldwin right now. It's very close, and he has only a narrow lead. So that's definitely a race where, we don't really have a well-defined outcome yet in that race.
Mm-hmm. And we're obviously still waiting on more results to come out of Texas at the moment. Hager appears to be in a good position, but we're doing our due diligence and waiting for more results to come out of there before we're absolutely certain. Regardless of how that race goes, this is a lot closer than Hager would have wanted. It's kind of similar to some of the other states we've seen, which I believe it was Kentucky, where you had a black progressive candidate who was able to come in there and perform a little bit better in late weeks because of some strong endorsements. Although I think West has actually polled better in polling than Hager has against Cornyn. if you look at opinion polling that's been put out.
I believe that was a Cornyn internal.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been multiple ones at this point.
That he retweeted publicly on his page, which was quite hilarious. Oh, we have a call.
We have 2 calls to make in Texas. First off, we can project that Raul Reyes, endorsed by Ted Cruz, will defeat Tony Gonzalez in the Texas 23 GOP runoff. He has a close 53-47 lead there, but it's only looking better for him as the night goes on. He will face Gina Ortiz-Jones in November in a race that we rate as likely Democratic. And in the Texas Senate race, we can project MJ Hager will defeat Royce West to take on Senator John Cornyn in November as expected. A closer race than polls suggested, but she will win. The outstanding votes are looking good for Royce West, and Decision Desk, our friends there have already made this projection. We can project MJ Hager will defeat Royce West to win the Democratic Senate nomination.
Mm-hmm. Very good night.
So you guys can articulate those thoughts on these new results.
Like I kind of said earlier, I don't think Hagar will be super happy with how tonight turned out. Personally, this does not give Democrats as much momentum as I think they were hoping for going into this race. Obviously, it was a very divided primary. Certainly more divided than I think they would have ever wanted it to be in what looks like to be a very competitive year for Texas. There certainly might be issues for MJ Hagar in the west of Texas and in the Dallas area, where she is not doing so well right now. And that is where, we see some of those GOP switches come in. But if she is not popular there right now, where she kind of needs those switches in Fort Worth and Houston area, where she kind of needs those GOP switches, it doesn't look like she's getting those right now. And she's not super popular right there among Democrats, and I don't think she'll be super popular among Republicans maybe there either, possibly. So either way, there is no, I think, huge swing of momentum for MJ Hagar right now. And I don't think she's going to just immediately start doing better because of this primary. I think I've made the comparison continuously that Trump is Cruz and John Cornyn is Greg Abbott when it comes to Texas races. If we want to make a 2018 to 2020 comparison, it's kind of, I think that's kind of how we're shaping up to be right now. And I think Hagar's happy that she won, but she's not happy with the margin, and she's not happy that I don't think that she's probably not going to get a lot of momentum going into the next night.
I would say one of the problems with Royce West's campaign is he could never seem to fundraise. And in a state like Texas, you have to have ads and staff in every single media market. There are like 30 in the state of Texas. In Texas, if you go on state level, there are essentially no campaign finance laws. So you can just call a notable law firm in your district and have them write a blank check for your campaign. But you can't do that when you run statewide. And that's something that a lot of legislators in states like Texas have. Like, that's a problem they have when they try to run for higher office. They can't tap into the old fundraising network, and they're kind of like a fish out of water when it comes to running.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think now, interestingly, I think with Hager especially now, be interesting to see now how much Cornyn's team takes out of this, and it was already seen that they were probably going to outperform the president on the Senate race. So now it's more interesting to see how many split voters we might get of Biden/Cornyn voters in the state of Texas.
Mm-hmm. I can kind of go into some of the dynamics here. Is that Cornyn has always been more of a favorite of the establishment, suburban, urban sort of wing of the Republican Party. His numbers have tended to sag more if you look at approval polling among strongly conservative voters. His strength among suburban and urban voters is the reason why he's polling better than Donald Trump is in the state of Texas at the moment. And it's why he's in a considerably better position going into November than Donald Trump is, even though we think that Donald Trump is favored to win the state of Texas, and most outlets either have him favored or a toss-up to some degree. Cornyn is going to be significantly harder to unseat. Like, for example, Hager is well-known, but she lost her race, which is kind of similar to Amy McGrath in Kentucky. A good candidate for a local race, but then they go into something bigger, and their chances of winning actually decrease. She's progressive on a lot of issues that some of the urban voters may not like, suburban Republicans. There's some issues Cornyn can attack her on. Although Cornyn has also not been necessarily the most impressive figure lately. If you look at some of, he's kind of taken some hits on some more Trumpy issues, trying to appeal to that wing. So you'll have to kind of look at it, but he is in a better position than Trump is in Texas at this point. I think most people would probably be fairly comfortable saying that.
Yeah, one thing I'm going to look for at in Texas is I'm just going to watch particular counties to see how trends are going. I'd say Fort Bend, Williamson, Hayes, Collin, and Denton.
Mm-hmm.
Like, any trend in Texas is going to happen in those counties.
Yeah, those are the color. Those counties voted. I believe they voted for Cruz by small amounts, but they're suburban counties. They're strongly experiencing some of those trends that have shifted Tarrant County into a more toss-up county.
Mm-hmm.
We have a call.
All right, guys, we have an important projection to make. In Alabama's 1st district, we can project Jerry Carl, the Mobile County Commissioner, will defeat Bill Hightower to win the seat. He's putting up a strong 58-42 margin in Mobile County, and as I said in my article yesterday, makes up 50% of the district's population, or not the population, but of the Republican electorate. It's a big county. Carl's doing well there, and we just don't see a feasible path to winning for Hightower at this point. He won Baldwin County in the first round. It was his only win, and right now he's coming close to actually losing Baldwin County to Carl. The few counties where he does have a lead do not make up a significant part of the electorate. So it's looking like Jerry Carl will be going to Congress, replacing Bradley Byrne in this seat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting win. It shows you the importance of having regional name recognition, especially in the most prevalent and most important county in your district like that. Whenever a candidate can get in who's popular and well-known in the county that makes up the majority of the vote that the electorate will cast in their district, that's always going to be good for them in terms of coming out with a win. And that's why we've only seen Carl's margin going up as of now. So.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. So I actually want to read this tweet that Donald Trump just put out, or I'm going to show it on the screen. We were talking about how Jeff Sessions is despised by Trump.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. He put out this tweet when the race was called. Look at this right here. Called him a terrible senator who was just a super liberal puppet for Schumer and Pelosi.
Woo.
That is about as harsh criticism as you are going to get of a Republican senator from Trump.
Sheesh.
Yeah.
What?
That's definitely something. It's kind of like the same thing when he called Pat Toomey a rhino late last week. You know, a liberal puppet is certainly not something I have ever really seen. I think by anyone. So it's certainly a very interesting comment to make about Jeff Sessions for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I still remember when he was being condemned by Chuck Schumer during the Dreamers vote for being cruel about the whole thing.
Like, is Trump met a Democrat?
Look, obviously, these Democrats, they all want to build a wall along the border. They all want to, less trade. Just all the sort of stuff that happens to coincide with this agenda.
Obviously.
The only Democrat is the Jeff Van Drew types.
That is the level of disdain we're talking about. That is why Jeff Sessions lost right there. If I can be bold enough to say that is probably why he lost, because it's one thing to endorse a different candidate. It's another to vehemently and repeatedly criticize the other one and say, I'm not associated with him. He can't associate with me. I don't agree with him. He shouldn't be a senator. Like, the level of bile directed at him was truly impressive.
I mean, it was basically scorched earth from the President of the United States to someone who
very rarely do presidents get that negative.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can't get much more negative than
someone who was I mean, it's close yet to basically saying, he was a traitor to the whole party. Basically.
Yeah. That's also got to be really. That's also got to be less than heartening for some of the more populist types who were really hoping for a Jeff Sessions comeback because they really wanted someone who more closely aligned with their positions. That's not what you want to see from the president.
Mm-hmm.
Like the last time I can think of a president saying something like that has to be Nixon's comments towards Mathias and Hogan after Watergate.
I just want to quickly update everyone. Other than Maine's 2nd District, Elections Daily has Maine's 2nd District and Texas's 31st District. Elections Daily has called every single race, and we are going to be having a projection in the Democratic runoff in Texas 31 here very, very soon, so you can expect that. But this election night has gone by pretty fast, so this coverage stream may be able to wrap up at 11 once we have projections done in all our races. So this is certainly a breath of fresh air in what has been a relatively slow election season this year.
Texas counts ballots fast, apparently.
NYT has also officially called it for Ronnie Jackson now. So it is officially official. Ronnie Jackson basically guaranteed to head to Congress now. NYT has officially just called that race.
Yep.
And on the point of ballot, it is a big on the point of balloting, not to jab at any particular states, but it's very nice that these states have counted the ballots very efficiently and fast, unlike the state of New York, which is still having its debacle on its balloting.
Mm-hmm. To be honest, I think New York is still counting the 1992 election.
Yeah, New York, you have some problems. It was luckily Adam is not on here to dissuade us from trashing on his home state, but I think and I'm sure you guys are all pretty happy with the way that Texas has gone. We know
it's absolutely
counting in a big state like this in the current situation we're in can't be easy, but I think he's done a good job. They've done a good job.
One of the reasons why Texas is one of my favorite states to map. Very interesting state. Very quick at downloading results and getting them out to the public.
There might be still ballots out after today, but we have enough results in
to make projections.
We can actually discuss elections and make right calls.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And not have like a 40-point swing or 70-point swing actually in New York 27
against Ben Jacobs.
Like it's only been 3 hours, and we've basically called most elections.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of us, at least, I may have been part of that, where like Nate McMurray was kind of imploding on Twitter. There were a lot of people going after him for saying the race would be closer, and then lo and behold,
he was at 27% on election night, but then he ended up literally going upward by almost 30 points.
I mean, if you look at those late ballots, he was winning them by an incredible margin, and so I kind of feel bad for him. He was really being made fun of for this. There's going to be a lot of that election night if this sort of stuff keeps up.
He has dropped back from he has dropped back a little bit, though now he's down to about a 13, 14-point margin. His high was I think, at like 8 points away from Jacob. Now he came back down to 13, 14 points, which is certainly not a bad showing at all, but it's certainly more typical of what we're kind of used to seeing in that district. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly not a terrible showing, and certainly shows where we're going with kind of counting ballots in this election in certain states, and I think it is going to be a problem. And it's something that we have to be kind of, I think, watching a little bit as election watchers.
The worry is that the people who call us the networks, the AP, etc., get Florida on us. We call a state and. The balloting suggests it's a different result than what we call. Obviously, we hope that doesn't happen, but that's the new era with COVID.
And yes, so far, though, we have a 100% accuracy rate here, so I think we're all keen on keeping our accuracy rate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we don't intend on being like some other outlets that...
Yes, that should not be named.
All right, guys, we have a projection right now in Texas's 31st district where we can project Donna Imo will defeat computer engineer Christine Mann to win the nomination there. MJ Hager ran for this seat last time against incumbent Republican John Carter. and finished just 3.2 points behind Carter in a very close race. Now Hager is the Senate nominee. It's unclear if Imam can make this race as competitive as that, but it certainly will be a contested race. Right now we have the race at likely Republican, but the race, like many in Texas, could easily become more favorable for Democrats depending on how the national environment is over the next few months. And I think this cycle, John Carter's seat is one of the seats that is kind of on the bottom of the Democrats' list of pickups in Texas, because if you think about it, they have obviously 23 at the top of the list. Then you have seats like 22 with Olson retiring. You have seats like District 10, Mike McCall, District 24, District 21 with Chip Roy and Wendy Davis. So, the Texas Democrats don't really need that seat, and arguably Hager was a stronger candidate than Imam is, but we just don't know this for sure yet. Either way, though, the Democrats have a ton of seats to target in Texas this cycle, and the 31st is one of the less competitive of them.
Yep. A lot of that was the unique strength of MJ Hager, who had a really strong campaign opening ad that endeared her a lot of sympathy. It was really an incredible, impressive ad that went after Carter specifically, and also built her up as a candidate who was really someone suburban women would want to vote for.
Yeah, I mean, and even looking at these likely Republican seats this cycle, I mean, there are quite a few seats that are actually rated as in the likely category that have been moved from safe. So Texas is seriously becoming a major battleground state for House races, because even these likely races like 31, 25 with Roger Williams, the 6th district, the 3rd district, these seats aren't going to be flipped by Democrats. It's very unlikely, but they are becoming more competitive for Democrats, which I think is just representing the long-term trends in Texas. And it's going to be interesting to see if Texas Republicans just try and draw a new map in redistricting that tries to, slow some of these trends down over the next decade when they'll likely become even more exacerbated.
Keep in mind that Texas is going to gain either 2 or 3 congressional districts.
Yeah, and it's likely Democrats will get a new Austin vote sync, because right now the city's split between 3 congressional districts, and by removing Austin from districts like the 10th, they could theoretically make that less competitive and drive it to the Republicans. Yeah,
there's a
so
lot
they
of
may end up doing that.
I wish Jared was still here, because he kind of explained. But there's a lot of exurban votes in Harris that they can utilize. That still vote. They vote more like Montgomery or some of the surrounding counties than they do like urban Harris County. But the Austin Mander was just a stupid decision to try to get out Lloyd Doggett. It was they had a personal vendetta against him and they wanted him out, and he still won anyway. They're not going to make that same mistake this time.
Oh no.
Yeah, because of that, they've effectively made multiple seats that were safe red a decade ago competitive, like the 10th district with McCall, the 21st with Chip Roy. Like it was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm. And again, this was a personal. There was no other reason to do this other than they wanted Lloyd Doggett out. They wanted he's a white, very liberal Democrat. They wanted him out.
Yeah, and they were almost successful at that. When they drew it, Joaquin Castro was looking at running for House of Representatives and was getting ready to primary Doggett, and then Charlie Gonzalez in San Antonio decided to retire, so he hopped to that district instead of challenging Doggett.
It's amazing. One of my favorite things about politics like that is how things can change subtly and quickly.
Yeah, another example, if we were talking about Texas, is Lamar Smith, who was one of the big Republican names at the time of the last redistrict. I believe asked for, I think, a good chunk of the UT Austin to be drawn into the seat, which now in hindsight really looks dumb, especially with where Austin is trending with.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You also have to remember, back in 2010, Travis County was blue, but it wasn't that blue.
Yeah, blue. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
he really wanted University of Austin because he was head of the science committee. And he just wanted all of that influence.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look at because the last incumbent to be defeated in a primary in Texas, I mean, obviously you had Beto O'Rourke defeating Silvestre Reyes in the El Paso seat in 2012, but in 2014, and I mapped this race out a few days ago, very interesting, John Ratcliffe primaried Ralph Hall. Ralph Hall was the chairman of the science committee at that point, and he had been a former Democrat who decided to switch during the DeLay-Mander era when basically they said you become a Republican or you lose. And he ended up losing his primary close, 53-47 there to Ratcliffe. But the interesting thing is Ratcliffe, as you know, resigned from Congress to become director of national intelligence, which doesn't seem very smart because Biden will just fire him if he wins. So he wouldn't be in office very long. But an update, the new Republican to be picked in the 4th District as their nominee, and they would basically be the shoo-in congressman there. They'll be picked by a state vote, state Republicans on August 8th.
And if I can comment on Texas 31's the Democratic nominee Donna Iman, she is an Andrew Yang backed candidate, and on her website she does show support for UBI, Universal Basic Income, on her website. She does make that one of her primary points. So that's very interesting to see if that could come up in this Texas 31 race, as well as that, and maybe if that becomes more of a prevalent issue among Democrats in primaries, as this is kind of the first true show of that we've seen throughout the primary so far.
It'll be interesting to see if Carter sleeps through this election, or if 2018 spooked him enough to actually campaign.
Yeah, I mean, on paper,
I could see him ending up winning by a bigger margin this time, because he was spooked last time, and now he's against a weaker candidate, so he'll probably campaign harder this time and could potentially win by a bigger margin than last time.
Yeah, doesn't this have like Round Rock in it and some other really rapidly growing?
Yeah,
Round Rock, Georgetown, the non-black portions of Killeen, which were specifically drawn out of the district. That's why there's a little notch in the top.
Yeah, I mean, Carter's seat on paper would be a great pickup for Democrats, but as noted, candidate quality and just possible how that seat's stepping up might just be one of the few seats that they may not in this good year get.
Yeah. It could easily be seen that the winner, like if Iman wins, she becomes a driftwood congressman who gets a safer seat in redistricting. As they get rid of as they get rid of that weird tendril that Flores' seat has that takes out Pflugerville.
Yeah, I mean,
surprised if Austin gets a second seat, just because it's just so Democratic at this point.
It might be smart to do that at this rate.
Just string it along to San Antonio, some of the bluer portions of that,
and just
even one precinct.
Just connect it to Hayes and put San Marcos in with University of Texas at Austin, creates a blue seat, and you take out the bluest part of Hayes County.
Yeah, because Carter, I mean, he's 78, so the age would say he's in trouble. But to his credit, this cycle, he seems to have he's taking the seriousness of his new demographics seats very important.
So right now, I believe the only call we have left to make is in Maine's 2nd congressional district, the primary in that. Obviously, the big factor there is ranked choice voting, whether or not it gets to that point.
And just on remind.
We have a projection to make, as Eric was just discussing. In Maine's 2nd district, we can project that there will be a ranked choice runoff there, as no candidate is likely to achieve more than 50% of the vote. Ranked choice voting, as you know, as the name suggests, candidates are ranked in preference by voters. So all we can say at this point is that Dale Crafts is the front runner. He has 44% of the vote, and someone who's truly underperformed expectations is Eric Brakey, who's now in 3rd place. And frankly, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see a change in outcome in this race. Crafts should be able to win the ranked choice runoff, just given the fact that he managed to perform this well already, and the fact that his nearest contender, his nearest challenger in the race, Adrian Bennett, is a full 13 points down. I mean, if you're looking at races where ranked choice makes a big difference, like last year's 2018 House race, Paul Oakman was leading with a plurality before the runoff, but he was only up slightly over Jared Gold.
It was only a couple percentage points. It wasn't double
Yeah,
digits.
it was not. It was definitely, yes. It was only a slight race. So that is our last projection of the night, and this was a quick election night. So the stream will be wrapping up here at the top of the hour. But I think we'll just spend these last 7 minutes really discussing the results of tonight, what they mean for the general election, and what we can look forward to next week.
Yeah.
I think what it really shows is it is actually possible to count your ballots quickly.
There's
Yeah,
states
for
that are
sure.
good, like Florida, all Florida gets, they usually get the results in pretty quickly. Texas gets them in pretty quickly. It's possible to do that. You just have to take effort to do it. Obviously, New York, we're still waiting for results from New York. It's been, what, a month? I mean...
It's always election day in New York.
Yeah. But, I mean, the thing that surprised me probably, not the Senate race. The Senate race in Texas was pretty close, but I think it was the margin in Alabama that was kind of surprising to me, because I think people generally thought Sessions would be a little bit closer, myself included. There were rumblings that it could be a little bit closer. There was a concerted attempt to kind of revive his reputation, to try and really present him as the true candidate that represents what Trump is and what he wants to accomplish. And ultimately, they weren't able to get past that. Losing Tuscaloosa, to me, was just unfathomable for Jeff Sessions.
An Auburn man winning in Alabama country.
I mean, you look at it right now. Yeah. You look at it. Tuberville is winning all but 3 counties. He's losing Madison, which is where Huntsville is. He's losing Mobile, which is where Jeff Sessions is from, and he's only barely losing it. He's losing it by 2%. And then he lost 1 black belt county, Wilcox. All in all, that's really bad. Like, that's a pretty decisive win for Tuberville, and it sets him up for a race against Doug Jones that he should be favored in by a substantial margin, as we discussed before.
And I believe he will become, should he win that race, probably the first, I believe, sports coach to be elected to the U.S. Senate, if I recall correctly.
Might be. I mean, we've had some athletes.
Probably.
Yeah, there have been a lot of athletes.
Ever elected to the Senate?
Coach, yes. Player, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Well, Tom Osborne was Nebraska's football coach, but he was elected to the House. He wasn't elected to the Senate.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Happy Chandler was a senator and a governor and was commissioner of baseball.
Yes. Mm-hmm. There's that one. Because I know you have...
There's Runyon, J.C. Watts, Largent.
Those are all players, though.
Yeah.
Oklahoma has a ton of them.
Because the most famous athlete elected to Congress is arguably Bill Bradley from New Jersey.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of my personal favorite representatives, Jack Kemp, was a former football player.
Jack Kemp,
player for the American Football League.
Mm-hmm. I think what is it? It was for the Chargers and the Steelers, the Buffalo and the Bills.
Buffalo Bills, yep.
Yeah.
And he represented Buffalo in Congress. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Tuberville might make history with becoming the first sports coach to be in a Senate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It would be even more ironic if Nick Saban made a bid in 2022.
But Nick Saban could be elected to the Senate if he just switched parties. That's all he has to do.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the Nick Saban, Matt Gaetz race or primary. That would be pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
There were rumblings that Matt Gaetz wanted to move to Alabama to run for Senate.
I mean, that part of Florida is Alabama. Let's just be honest.
Pensacola, yeah.
That would have been interesting to see the local reaction to a Florida man trying to run in their state of Alabama.
Florida man gives Panhandle to Alabama.
So far tonight, just to review the results before we wrap up, it's been a very, very interesting election night. I mean, we've had successes for Trump, obviously, with Tuberville beating Jeff Sessions, and then we've had Pete Sessions and other Sessions reignite his political career. Ronnie Jackson has won the 13th district. Will be heading to Congress there. We've seen Valenzuela and Siegel, 2 progressives, and Dinah Imon as well in swing districts take the Democratic nomination, and Democrats will be targeting those seats. And in the 22nd district, we saw Troy Niels beat Kathleen Wall by a much larger than expected margin there. So going forward, we also called the race in Texas 23. Reyes, his lead has gone down. Now he's only up 51-49, but it's still a race that we expect him to win because Bayhart County, the San Antonio suburbs, is losing, or no, is their votes are being cast mostly. And at the end of the day, if Gonzalez is winning there but not doing well enough there to take the lead, then once those votes dry up, the rest of the rural counties that are breaking heavily for Reyes should allow him to have a narrow win. So we're sticking with that projection for now. We're going to keep following it to watch. And in Texas Senate as well. We saw MJ Hager mobilize San Antonio, Austin, El Paso, Hispanic voters in the 23rd district and the other majority Hispanic districts along the Texas-Mexico border, as well as those handful of rural white Democrats that are left in the solidly Republican West Texas region to outmatch Royce West, who had strong black support and did well with black communities in Houston and in Dallas. So it's been an interesting night. I want to thank you guys. Do you guys have anything else to say before we wrap up the stream tonight about the elections tonight?
The Republicans will not have any chance in Texas 23 now that Raul Reyes is the likely nominee. Any possible hope is gone.
Eric, anything?
Not particularly, no. I think pretty straightforward results in terms of the night. Republicans got a lot of wins they wanted. Democrats got a lot of wins they wanted. I think most Texas Republicans are fairly happy, aside from the Reyes race and maybe Ronnie Jackson. I think everyone's pretty much kind of knew what was coming in some of these races.
Yes. So again, to our viewers, thank you for watching. This is exactly what November is going to be like. We're going to be developing hopefully some new, more advanced intro graphics, actually, along with music for projections. But it's going to be interesting. This is how it's going to be. This was a good stream, and we're happy to have you guys all as our viewers and our supporters on our Elections Daily account. And if it weren't for you guys, we wouldn't be successful. So again, thank you to our viewers that watch these streams every Tuesday, and it's only going to get better from here until November.
Yeah, and
see you guys in August.
Yeah, thanks again to DDHQ for lending us their data for the night. And thanks, and definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you know when we're doing future live streams like this. It's really helpful if you click the bell icon. I know you hear everyone say that, but if you click that, you will get notifications when our streams are coming up.
And guys, we will see you in August. We will take a 2-week break here as we don't have any primaries in these next 2 weeks. But August 4th, we have a load of primaries coming to you guys. And don't worry, we will surely be here to call them and watch them with you all.
Good night to all our viewers.
Yes, good night, and thank you for watching.